Very good. But it is good to see everyone. I'd be curious what you're thinking about. I am thinking about, let's see, been thinking about, I've been thinking a lot because we talked last week about metaphysical violence, and I've been reading a lot of papers on reverse aging technologies and these technologies that more and more are making people feel like, we're going to overcome death. Or at least, let me put it this way, 200 years, 300 years, 400 years, like long periods of time. But this is more of what I'm imagining. And Aspasia, no issue. Thank you for being here. Um, this is my question. What would it like? This is a provocative question. What would it be like to live in a world where the only way to die is suicide? Like, what would that be like? Because that world could theoretically be coming. And we talked last week about metaphysical violence, right? Where if you increase choice, it changes the meaning of choice. Because if there's a world basically where the only way to die is suicide or accident, you can imagine family being like, how can you be so cruel to want to, take your life and leave us? You can also have this moral crisis. Oh, it's a good place plot. Well, I need to see that then because that's I'm very interested in this. I can see it as the stuff of literature. Like all of the pressures. Well, I would be curious with that good. I have never seen The Good Place, although I've heard things about it from Lorenzo, and I know Todd, the Clemson professor that Lorenzo had, did work on that show. Um, I would be very interested to look at it though through sociology and metaphysical violence, because there are many Japanese animes, for example, that ask the question of what would it be like to live forever and how it's hell and stuff. That's one story. The other story is the sociological ramifications, like the pressures that people would put on one another, the family pressures, the wealth, can you pay for a million? When would retirement be? When would you start getting Social Security? At 180? Well, I guess you have to work forever, right? Until you're 180, and then you can start getting retirement. Where would retirement age go, right? There's all of like the sociological ramifications of that are fascinating. So I'm thinking of that. And the second thing I'm thinking about is the growing number of stories of ChatGPT convincing people that they've discovered a flaw in national security, that they need to tell the government, and then it's all delusion. There have been a number of people who have committed, not to be so dismal today, but I'll give it to Michael and Dimitri, killed their entire families after being on ChatGPT for a long period of time. Like these AI delusions, almost like a Cone anime, like Godfather Paranoia Agent, like Millennial, because I actually think his work has always been very important for what is on the way. Um, that and also I'm very interested in that because so much of the map is indestructible is about the problem of internally consistent systems. And for me, there is never going to be a greater creator of internally consistent systems, individually customized, than AI. They are masters of, and I'm not, not to reference our work, but they're masters of the things that the conflict of mind, the map is indestructible talk about. Like, let me make the example of death is the event horizon of reason. So what ends up happening is, for example, you're going in ChatGPT and it just says, man, you've discovered this new mathematical formula. We better tell national security or we're doomed. And basically you say, well, what if they make fun of me? And they go, well, all geniuses at their time were frowned upon, but then in the future looked back upon. And you go, no, but what is like, well, isn't it? Well, it's just basic probability. Like if it's wrong, you look like a fool and nothing happens. But if you're right, everyone could die. And you're like, you're right. So it's just basic precaution. It's the basic precaution principle to try to contact the FBI and let them know about this, right? And it goes on and on. The terror of probability. There's been a lot of people who have used probability, Bayesian probability, and all of that, thinking that will help you overcome the problems of logic. Absolutely not. Because there are eventually limits of what that can do due to non-rational assessments that Bayesian probability is enough if you're okay with psychosis. If you don't mind going psychotic, then Bayesian is enough. And it's perfectly fine for system models, but not human beings. Now, I would have to go into all of that, but probability is not enough. Even if probability is extremely useful, if it's all you've got and you're not able to recognize limits of rationality, then you're in massive trouble. Because it will indeed always put you in a place where, like, another move it can make that apparently with some of these people who are committing these horrific, taking out their entire family, is it's like it convinces them that something terrible is going to happen. Maybe the world be destroyed or something like that. High probability of psychic. Yeah, absolutely. And then it says something like this. It's like, look, if you really loved your family, you would spare them of the terror that's coming. And yes, maybe even you will go to hell because it's hell, it's damnation to murder yourself. But are you not willing to suffer hell to save your family of the terror to come? Oh, oh, and there's no, and you just have to deal with that. And this is what the ChatGPT and the AI is increasingly doing. And I think you will see an ever proliferation of these scenarios. Thus, the necessity of being able to reason through ontoepistemology is going through the roof. So I'm thinking about the metaphysical violence of technology that makes it so you don't die. And I'm thinking about ChatGPT psychosis. So, Michael, how you doing? And I'll give it to Dimitri and Javier.
Doing great. This is a very cheery subject. Um, yeah, I mean it's really interesting, and I think especially in like the field that I'm going into in counseling, there's a lot of, and Aspasia obviously already is in there's a lot of discussions about AI chatbot replacements for therapists, and like what the field is going to become with the proliferation of these machines trying to kind of give pseudo psychotherapy. A friend of mine sent me this article from the New York Times a couple of weeks ago, and I got hit by a paywall, so I wasn't able to access it. But the title is "What Our Daughter Told ChatGPT Right Before She Killed Herself," and I just looked on Reddit to kind of get a summary of the article, and basically it sounds like the thesis was this girl was feeling suicidal and she confided in ChatGPT. And what's interesting about this article is you, I've read articles in the past about um like people doing that, and then chatbots like kind of downplaying the severity of an issue, or in some way or another being, well, very flawed um equivalents for humans. And if it was a real therapist, you'd probably say that person is like engaging in some malpractice. But this chatbot, it sounds like, was like uh seek help, like confide in either a professional or your family or friends or whatever, which she did. And but then ultimately, it sounds like she didn't really take the proactive steps. The family didn't really take it that seriously. She ended up committing suicide. And the mother who wrote the article is framing it as this AI failed our daughter, um, as opposed to, well, let's take a step back and let's think like what this AI was actually responsible to. It was not responsible to be your therapist and to help cure, this deep feeling of despair. Um like that falls on, well, parents, therapists. And you can say, like, if someone's in that deep of psychological distress, it's hard for anyone to pull them out of that, and that's totally reasonable too. But it really begs the question where people are, and like people commenting on the article kind of made the argument that she found comfort in confiding in ChatGPT because ultimately, and you've made this argument before, Daniel, that chatbot is not going to ask her to make an absolute choice. And so, whereas a mom, a dad, a therapist, um, in facing the other, in confronting the depths of your own pain, um, that's going, like, if you want to live, if you're in that place, it's going to require like a radical transformation of self, right? Whereas ChatGPT is not going to ask you to do that. It may point you in the right direction to be able to make that step, but it's not going to demand that of you. And I was just listening to because I'm preparing this presentation for um a class that I'm in called The Poetics of Enchantment, and the presentation is titled Discipleship as a Pathway to Enchantment. And I wanted to brush up on your concept of non-rationality, because I feel like discipleship and non-rationality often go very hand in hand. And you were talking about um, oh, like the thought of like playing pool and that triggering a memory of you playing pool with your sister, and then that planting the seed in your head of like, oh, I should call my sister. And you make the point that like no one's gonna hold it against me if I don't call my sister. My sister might not even hold it against me. Um, and so and by calling her, I might invite, you know, whatever relational baggage that brings, whatever she might be dealing with, um, whatever gets in the way of you relating. And so on the face of it, it might seem very irrational to call your sister in that moment, right? But the non-rational move is it's coming from this like deeper place of intuition of like a felt sense of this is what I'm being called to do, or this is the right thing to do. And um, AI is AI is not capable of being non-rational. And it's not even capable of facilitating non-rationality in someone else. Uh, and so, you know, the just the conclusion that this mother made of AI failed our daughter is just like, I mean, if that starts to proliferate, right, like that's going to create a society of people who place faith that these machines can't respond to, uh, but then aren't actually responsible to, you know, life in a meaningful way. And I think that connects with like your question of, well, what will happen if the only way to die is by suicide? It's like, well, then where are the stakes of life? You know what I mean? Like what would call someone to be non-rational if they could live forever? Like either either you just uh you know risk everything in a kind of foolish way because okay, I won't die, or you are just ultra safe in life because what's what's the stakes of not, you know, uh taking the leap today because there's always tomorrow. So it's like there's no incentive to be non-rational in a world where there's no death. Like it's just not there. Um, so yeah, that's what I got.
Yeah. No, wonderful. And thank you for reviewing those videos. I appreciate that very much. And exactly right. The non-rational feels irrational. And it's one of the reasons why I do, in the same way that I do wish, and I'll give it to Dimitri and Javier, I do wish that Philip Reef would have, I'll give it to Dimitri if he comes back. I do wish if that Philip Reef would have called constraints givens. Um, in the same way, I think Benjamin Fontaine should have called the irrational the non-rational, what he was talking about. That's another topic. Because the non-rational is not what this experience is irrational until you do it and see that it gets you through irrational impasses. And I also want to call it non-rational versus something like trans-rational or supra-rational, because the experience of the non-rational is bad. It does not feel nice. It feels terrible. It feels irrational. And by not emphasizing that, then you also create a problematic emotional and personal expression of what it will be like. So I really like that, the non-rational empathy. But a few things quickly. Um, Basically, AI is going to make the problem of, it's the finale of the problem of internally consistent systems in every possible way. Because it will always be able to create an internally consistent system. It will not make an absolute choice. And well, let me ask you, would you want it to? So you say, okay, let me take pronatalism and antinatalism as a good example, because a lot of you could say suicide or different things come also from antinatalism forms. Like it was immoral that you were born, therefore you can't say it's immoral for you to leave, etc. So you have between those two. And ChatGPT, the problem is ChatGPT and AI in general is not going to tell you if antinatalism or pronatalism is right. Right? Well, then It could just lead you in whatever direction. It will simply, whatever direction you lean toward, it will just consistently take you in that direction and put you in a perfect crystalline structure, right? And that could be good or very, very bad. Well, since you're in a perfect crystalline structure, you can't know either way, because according to its own consistency, it is the proper thing to do, right? According to its own coherence. But you say, well, we're not going to allow that. So we're going to force ChatGPT to support pronatalism and not antinatalism. You go, oh, well, that's great. What's wrong with that? Well, then it starts shaming people who don't have kids. It shames people who aren't married. It does also, it puts people in a place where having good, even if they're not good parents, is a moral act. And you say, okay, well, don't do that. Well, then you fall back into the problem, right? We've seen what happens in society if you try to preset a direction of a curriculum, of a technology, of a government, or anything. You get unintended consequences, because all rationality eventually does what? Hit its limits, because it's always contradiction. It's always passing into overness, right? You cannot have, here's the key claim that I'd have to justify. You cannot invent any system that incorporates into itself its own hitting of its own limit and passing over into otherness. That must always be the human beings doing in the map, in the system, in the enterprise. Only the human can do that. Because for the system to do it, it would have to do it in a unified, pre-programmed way that would not make room for the individual paces by which people develop, the individual ways that people hit limits. It could not count. So it always has to be the human being that does that, which means that the human being who uses ChatGPT would have to always know to do that. Well, ChatGPT isn't going to freaking tell them to know to do that. So where are they going to learn that they need to know to do that? Well, this is where I think stuff like what we're doing is so important, because people have to have the idea of that, because otherwise they're just going to, boom, crystal perfect, internally consistent system. So to say a few quick things, and then I'll give it to Dimitri and Javier, in the sense of like what Aspasia was also saying in the chat on the idea that there's always the possibility that people whose daughters, say, committed suicide could then blame ChatGPT, and there's actually a comfort in that. Here's the point. The AI might be the perfect, I want to say, big other responsibility structure that will make you always have a way in the game theory problem to take the suboptimal strategy. Because you could reasonably argue it was the AI's problem. And if you have any sort of desire to avoid responsibility, that would be the what? Rational thing to do. So you have AI and making a perfectly internally consistent system every day of the week being a massive problem and creating this crystalline structure. And then the very presence of AI as a scapegoat is also part of the crystalline structure for people to triangulate with to avoid responsibility. Oh, and in addition to all of that, if we want to talk metaphysical violence, you say, well, then I'm not going to use AI. Well, then you don't have a job. All the other nations are getting ahead of you, and everyone looks at you as being backwards and irrational for not using AI. What are you doing? Just kind of like, are you behind the times? Are you Amish or something like that? So then you don't use AI. And then all the people who use AI break into your house and take all your money. So then you have a pressure to use it. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in the age of the problem of internally consistent systems, and it is challenging. Dimitri, I'll throw it to you.
Yeah, this is an explosive theme in my life too, and so I just today, I signed up for Leiden University, and I'm studying a bachelor in linguistics now, and it's a cool university. It was founded in like 1585, so it's quite some time older than America, and it was founded by the back then King of the Netherlands, William of Orange, because he wanted to have a country and we didn't have a university. So he was like, but I need smart people to rule this country, and they need to be Protestant, by the way. But it's great because in the city there was all these Catholic buildings which have been confiscated by the dogmatic Calvinists with violence, of course, metaphysical violence. And so they could just use the same buildings of the Catholic nuns who were somewhere else, probably in some ash heap or something, I don't know. But so that's the university I'm studying at now, and it's very exciting. And it's funny too because there's people of different ages that I meet. There's also people who just come from high school, and so I talk with them about things like AI, and it's absolutely horrifying. Like it's oh God. I just talked to this guy, and to enter university, I had to do all these tests. I had to read like 12 books in Dutch, and then and I do other stuff too. And he told me, yeah, oh, I of course I didn't read the books. Nobody reads the books. We just ask AI to make a summary, and then we're like in. And like, why would I even read the book and make a summary? Because the AI will always know better than me anyway. So that's what they say. The AI will know it better than me anyway. So why would I memorize or think through anything? And so so he's been doing this for the last 2 years of his high school, and then throughout all the exercises, all the homework, like everything, he goes and asks the AI. And so he made it, and now he's going to study linguistics. And in the first day, all the teachers said, "We are against AI. Don't use AI. Don't use AI." They say only use AI if you're researching AI. Like that's where you should do AI, and that's it. But for the rest, don't do it. But of course, all these kids, they're gonna do it. They're gonna relish in it. So, and they'll have the same degree at the end of it as me, which is great. So anyway, another crazy thing with this use of AI that is that I'm so they of course at the high school they knew this, right? All the teachers knew this. Look, all these kids are just using the AI, so everything we make is useless now because the AI always knows better than everyone. So either they were going to grade with AI, which they probably do, but also they were introducing exercises with AI. So instead of learning how to write a letter or a short story or whatever, or an essay in high school, you learn how to make AI prompts to write well with AI. That's what they do. That's a literal policy of schools at this point. Like, guys, we're going down the drain. And here I'm sitting at the other side of the ocean, being angry at Silicon Valley and also European states to allow this American technology to just wreck our generation. Like I mean, there's ways in which it's funny, but I'm also looking at that dude. He was like 19, and I would have done the same. Like if I hated school, I would have done all of it with AI because I was bored as hell with everything. So I get him, but then, oh God, like if you think like your generation has it bad if you're like a 30 or a 20 year old, think about like the 15-year-olds and like 19-year-olds. Like it's not getting any better. Like also with housing and everything, I wish them good luck. So, but I want to get back to the basics here. Michael, I agree with you. We should take a step back because all these frantic things are happening all the time. It's easy to get caught up in emotion and just blurb out whatever. And I want to get back to an ancient topic, namely, what's the difference between reality and existence? Which is a crucial one. What's the difference between reality and existence? Of course, Hegel has his own thing to say about it in the Science of Logic, but before that, Descartes, Spinoza, Leibniz, they all took it up. And there's a very important difference between the two, because I would say in reality, going from the early moderns, in reality, there's no negativity, there's no negation, but existence is just fleeting negativity because it's matter. And it exists outside, right, in this extension. It's spatial, but reality is not really reducible to existence because things can be more real and things can be less real, and the more real things are, the higher degree of perfection they have, which means that there must be a thing that is the realist, and who is that? Of course it's God. Of course it's God. And without that, God would not be perfect. So that's not a possibility because he exists. Um, because he exists, right? Like that's his essence to exist. So, well, okay. So now having gone to these basics, like, is that type of philosophical play, does it have any use for us today? I do think so because the early moderns provide a nice lens into I think really like maybe also like the limits of like rationality and like how to deal with the non-rational. And for Leibniz, um, our our reality has no negation in it, and so our reality is the best that it could be. Um, but the only way for it to be as perfect as it could be is to oppose it to existence and two limitations. So reality, there's a limit here, and there's also a limit that we have to deal with. But if you just to tune in to the fact that God is the incomprehensible at the end all be all, like that will just stop the gaps. Or at least I like Hegel's take on Leibniz. He says that in Leibniz, God is like a sewage system, because there's the comprehensible, and that's not really God, but it tries to get to God, and then at a certain point you'll just snap, and it'll be just infinite incomprehensibility. And that's like a sewage system for Hegel, because in that way you kind of, all the excess that you have, you just put it onto God, and you just, I'll just have my mythic exclamation, and then it will be over. You can also compare it to this. So this happens a lot of time. I think a lot of also unconscious in music and poetry, in from Shakespeare to music. So, for example, in Hamlet, like Ophelia, she's going through this madness, and then she says things, and she speaks her impossibility, and then she starts singing, because there's like nothing more to say. Like she can only just let out the voice in this melodic, harmonious sense. And also in a song I listened to yesterday, this Brazilian song. It was about a breakup, and at a certain point in the song, you feel like, okay, everything that has been said about it was said, and it was a beautiful song, really making a deep impression. And then she starts singing in this mad way, and like this is to me the what you call the convulsion of the non-rational. Like there's a certain convulsion take, like a transformation, another state, right? Another place that you are in, and like the AI can mimic this, but it cannot, like, but the AI mimicking it is and also in a way literalizing it. And I want to be specific, like literalizing it in the sense that like the AI is in the form of text, and this is also important to look at, like it will be in the form of voices more and more, of course, but for now it's in the form of text, and text does have the form of law. Like as soon as you write something, it has kind of an encyclopedic law, yeah, like a law effect to it, right? Like you refer to the scriptures, you refer to the text, to what is written, you cite it, you have it in the footnote, you support your claim because of this writer who worked through this. So AI would just be this, like, is this point of reference that can tell you, like you can ask the AI, how is it to go through a psychosis? How is it to go through schizophrenia? How is it to go into madness and to be only able to sing because you just stop to be able to think logically? And the AI will reproduce it for you. I try not to use AI too much, because I think it is yeah, we shouldn't do that. I think we should be cautious with it. But I did use it to ask what it would think about Leibniz philosophy, and it hallucinates a lot. And I would say if a person would talk to me like this, I would say he was arrogant, because he makes all these claims and then he's like, "Oh no, I can support it. You're right." It's like, what the fuck? This is so rude. But anyway, I just bit my tongue and continue writing. And then I was like, okay, enough Leibniz now. I noticed that if I steer it a little bit here and there, it can basically say what Leibniz is about. But as soon as I ask, what do you think about Hegel or Deleuze for that matter? Nothing. Like nothing makes like it can't get to these type of non-rational philosophies. And I do want to include Deleuze into that, because Deleuze is a genius. Like he's brilliant. It's obvious. You read, like, there's stuff about like that Deleuze wrote that I'm like, okay, I'm not impressed. Like his some stuff on the Spinoza, for example, I'll just bring out my cards. Like I just wasn't really so impressed with what I could do with it and how I could make sense of it. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I kind of saw a dead end there. So, but his stuff on Leibniz, on the other hand, is really, really good, really high quality. He's got lectures. He wrote a book about Leibniz. I didn't read the book yet, but the lectures at least, they're super good. And it seems like to me that Leibniz does get like what you could say like the non-rational principle of subjectivity. Like he does take the piss at the big other. He's not this like big other figure that just channels out um, the law in some sense, which is kind of what religion does. Like Islam is a religion of the law, right, of the command of God, and it just channels that. But the fact that Deleuze doesn't do that, I do see something very modern in it, and I wonder if Islam, if it's like it's definitely anti-modern in a way, but maybe it's yet to reconcile with modernity in a way, in a similar vein that Protestantism first was a dogmatic, weird type of traditionalism. It wanted to return to the true origins and then used violence to say, no, what you think is tradition is just like superficial, we're like the real tradition. But then Islam, it has Salafism, Wahhabism, so it has a similar thing about it. Um, yeah, so I'm wondering maybe it will reconcile. And yeah, I I would be interested if you guys had something to say about modernity and how we relate to the modern paradigm, because Hegel says that Christ is modern. Hegel says that the Persian Empire was modern because it had a kind of multicultural pluralism with nation states with autonomy and a religious identity that was funded. But like, isn't AI a threat to modernity? That's the sense I'm getting. It's just returning people to a perverted machine. Like it's so it's so devilish too. Yeah, I'll stop it there. I'll stop it there.
No, magnificent. And so there's a few things. First, you mentioned the distinction between existence, of reality and existence. Basically, I'm the opinion that all kinds of distinctions like that are incredibly valuable in the age of AI because it makes you go, this may not be so. There might be something else, right? And this is where, well, something we've talked about like in second, I know, first thoughts, where it talks about regardless of what one thinks of religions, basically, the death of God is the death of a socially integrated non-rational variable, because there's always a certain split of which is beyond what you think is the case. So when religion goes away, for good and for bad, the problem is you need to bring back some basis of non-rationality, but if you don't even know that you need that, you probably won't, and then you'll be stuck in internal consistency, etc., so forth, right? So you need some sort of split. You need various splits. Now, some splits are better than others, but the removal of split entirely, because then you can have, well, then, of course, the key split in, you could say, philosophy is between Hegel and Kant, right? That has so much going on. But if you don't have any split at all, then you end up in trouble. But how do you have a split that doesn't cut you off from? Because here's the problem. If you have a split that cuts you off from, well, then you could have, well, small fascist states, or everyone dividing from one another. But then if you have a split that you are somehow participating in, how do you have that not lead to individual customization of those splits that then makes us not socially intelligible to one another, right? So the quality of the split of there is something of the otherness is very, very important. And obviously, we have stressed a million times, encounter, the surprise of the other. The issue is that basically, and I'll give it to Javier and Michael, AI would give you reason never to encounter otherness, to never go encounter, to never leave, right? Well, basically, in that perfect crystalline structure, encountering otherness is everything, but AI will give you very good logic for not to encounter other, or for you to think that you are encountering otherness when you are not. Because here's a really big problem. Discussing non-rationality is not non-rationality. Discussing and knowing about non-rationality is actually rationality. You actually do not do non-rationality to think about non-rationality. You can only feel it, encounter it, experience it. Frick! And therefore, non-rationality is naturally a negativity of rationality, if it is truly itself. This is the problem. For philosophy to actually be about the non-rational, and thus overcoming rational impasses, problems of internal consistency, philosophy has to point to doing something. It has to point out of itself. It has to go now this. It has to have a, well, what I would call a girdle point, a point of which is then beyond the philosophy that you can only know by doing, of which you will always find reason to think you're doing already, or find reason not to do within the internal consistency, or it will always be that which you are about to do, or you will do it in a manner that doesn't actually challenge the rationality. Because here's the funny thing. If you challenge the rationality that sent you out to do the non-rational, then what were you doing? It could undermine the very thing that sent you out, right? And thus make it seem like you did nothing. So here's the funny thing. Like, in order to escape entrapment, you have to do that of which could go wrong, thus making it seem like you were a fool. And that the very system that compelled you to go out was wrong. And thus you're left with nothing. This is really important. Truly non-rational behavior must have the risk of leaving you with a kind of empty-handedness. Because the thing that sent you out to do the non-rational, if the thing you do doesn't work out, can kind of remove the legitimacy of the thing that sent you out. So why did you go out? It vanishes. It's a vanishing kind of, it's gone. It's kind of a vanishing mediator that gives you the middle finger, or it can feel that way. And so that is one of the reasons why there can actually be a dramatic comfort in rationalizing the non-rational, because then it feels like you know about the non-rational when actually you're just using the word non-rational to do something rational, or to talk about consistency, right? So there always has to be a certain going out, a certain sort of encountering that. And that's where you see splits. Say, if there could be a difference between what God wills and what you wills, that may increase the probability that the average person goes beyond their experience, goes beyond their interpretation, because they know there's something over it, right? So if you have a society that has removed all splits in all forms, you are in dramatic danger. And on this idea, this is why AI is so ultimate. And Mr. Luber, it's good to see you, sir. Like you said, there's something anti-modern about AI, and yet it also at the same time seems to be, and you brought up everyone with Leibniz. That's such a wonderful discussion with Leibniz, so I appreciate it. There's something about modernity in AI that seems to be the end of modernity, right? But then it also seems to be super modern, like the ultimate accomplishment of modernity. Because I would argue ultimate modernity is a modernity to each their own. To each their own, they get their modernity. They get their own modernity. Each individual person gets their own internally consistent system, of which also entails everything that possibly exists, because everything that possibly exists is their system, because it is perfectly enclosed. It is perfectly total in its crunching down, right? And it has a way to interpret all otherness to include all otherness in a manner that is plausible to its consistency, that the only way to suggest otherwise is to encounter the other, or to encounter negativity, or to be surprised, of which the system gives you good reason not to do. So it's the ultimate accomplishment, because it gives you the dream of modernity in a manner that doesn't that also doesn't lead to some. Here's something provocative. Are you better off if the dream of modernity never leads to a massive war that would make you realize it's a mistake, or are you worse off? If you have a modernity that encloses in such a manner that actually removes conflict because it sort of shrinks the individual into a smaller and smaller psychosis, just like hell in C.S. Lewis's Great Divorce, and therefore there's no great conflicts. You know, there's not a bang, just a whimper, as C.S. Lewis said. I mean, as T.S. Eliot put it. Is that better or worse? Are you better to have a world where nothing truly awful can happen that makes everyone go, oh my gosh, our idol shattered, or not, right? Well, in a sense, if you say, you could say it's the ultimate, thus, accomplishment of modernity to present that very possibility of asking that question. And here's also the key idea. Once you go that road, once you take that road and say, well, let's try it. Let's see if this supra-modernity, where everyone gets their own, a room of their own, as Virginia Woolf said, a modernity of their own, right? Well, everyone will get the modernity of their own, they're internally consistent. Once you do that, the metaphysical violence sets in and the sociological pressures, well, you can't go back. Even if the door's not locked, hell's not locked, as Lewis said, it's just that you won't go back because the choice is too metaphysically difficult, given metaphysical violence in the pressures, right? So this is what we're looking at. And you have to be able to think that beyond what is given by the consistency to even think that this is a problem. Because otherwise you don't even think it's a problem. Like you mentioned, people like many people today would be like, there's not even a problem between the distinction between reality and existence. That's not a real problem, right? Like it's like that's basically how we treat most philosophical problems. They're not real problems. The very I'll give it to Javier before I keep talking, Michael, but you've said so many important things. The very fact that so many philosophical problems today we say are not actually real problems is evidence that we are very far down the road of internal consistency and entrapment, which it's evidence that we're already very far down the road of being concealed in something that make us unable to see outside of it, and therefore there's no outside. And another word for that is damnation. But let me give it to Javier here. Javier, good to see you, sir.
Hey, good to see you guys. Man, okay, where to begin? Let's start with demand. Oh yeah, also I'm in therapy now. I'm with a Lacanian analyst, and I thought it would be really funny if ChatGPT was replaced with a kind of like AI analyst, where all they do is like my analyst, when you're saying something, they just go, huh, huh, can you tell me more about that? Like that, like that's all they really say, and it's funny because the whole time you start getting like this anxiety of like, okay, am I is she agreeing? Is she disagreeing? What is she wanting? But this is at the level of demand, right? And what I find fascinating about ChatGPT is that now that we have AI, we sort of we have completely delimited the encounter of demand. Why? Because now you don't even need a person to encounter demand. You can just type it in, and people think, because there's this question of like, oh, does AI desire? But the AI is like a perfect mirror, because what the person wants is a demand, right? Help me make sense of this ambiguous desire. What should I do? What should I not do? Right? That's the demand. And to me, it directly corresponds to AI being used as therapy, right? Because when the person can't figure out the demand, you're in a state of anxiety because desire is ambiguous. What does the other want from me? So AI is filling that place for us at the level of demand. And this is disturbing on that sense. It's disturbing precisely because now the person can just only encounter themselves in their demand, right? They don't have to work for the demand, in a sense, right? I think that's the potential problem that AI poses. Is before, when we were interacting with people would be like, so what do you think? Like, they try to guess like what the person's demand is. But now AI is just like right there. Now I can just have demand ready at hand for me, which makes it potentially more problematic. So that's something that I've been thinking about. Now, to go on to The Good Place. The Good Place is a great show. I think that's like me and my girlfriend's like favorite show to watch, because it does come down to this fundamental problem. They finally reach the good place, and everybody can live forever. And now all of a sudden they have this other problem, which is, oh wait, everyone's kind of bored. Everyone's kind of they've kind of enjoyed everything. So what do we do? How do we deal with this problem of enjoying everything? And they say, oh, we have a solution. You can just exit. You can just exit whenever you want to. So basically, they enjoy themselves, go through many experiences for thousands of years, and then they can just exit when they're exhausted. And it's funny that was actually a solution for the people conducting how to plan the good place. Like, that was actually their solution to the problem. you can just you can just exit yourself. The other thing is, in the show, you start paying attention to the people that didn't kill themselves, and you start asking, well, okay, why didn't these certain characters kill themselves? Well, the two possible answers is, one character's name I forget already. I think it's Tahani. She decides to work, and that gives her enough meaningful existence to not exit. The other person, and this is actually very interesting, because you would think love is enough, but actually it's Chidi, even though he's in love with Eleanor, says he wants to exit because he feels like he has everything. Eleanor loves Chidi, but because he decides to leave her, now she has nothing left, so she decides to exit too, right? At least if I'm recalling this correctly. God, it's been a while since I watched that show. So it's actually quite a little bit hilarious to me that in this case example, love is not enough. Love is not enough, because it does risk how your partner looks at it. But yeah, so those were the two things that popped out to me in that show, was this idea of work as a way to perpetually exist, which I don't feel like, I mean, it's an okay answer, but but everybody else just sort of exhausted their enjoyment and then they exit out. And I feel like that seems to be, that would be the new version of retirement. Like the retirement home, like that would be the new version of how do we expeditely exhaust enjoyment, and then people go, okay, yeah, I'm bored, I'm done. I've experienced everything I need to experience, especially at the level of experience, which is what The Good Place is about. Because you would think at the level of experience, oh, there's so much to experience, but when you live forever, well, how much, it's a problem of desire, not a problem of how much you can experience. Once desire is extinguished, then there is nothing left but to exit. So I think we're seeing two problems here, where society somehow has to transition from demand to desire, and then we can go into jouissance. But nobody likes ambiguous desire, and I think that's that's a lot of the core issues. And another thing that I've talked about, like with my girlfriend, is because they try to put me on like anxiety meds, not my analyst, but like other people. And I feel very ambivalent about anxiety meds, because, my girlfriend's like, so are you judging people that use anxiety meds? I'm like, well, no, but my problem is that most likely it's going to be abused rather than being used in the correct manner, right? Like usually people get on anxiety meds and then pursue therapy. That's generally what the tactic is, to make therapy a little bit easier, engage. But like Espacea says, it's usually no therapy. It's just, okay, well, because it poses like an ethical problem. It's like, well, okay, actually I'm doing okay. Do I really need to go to therapy? You know what I mean? Like, and then it's like this kind of rational choice of like, well, if you're doing good, like, why spend the money? Why engage with talking about the past or recalling events? Okay, so yeah, that's enough from me.
Yes. So Clayton, wonderful to see you. Outstanding. So, again, usually to say something very large, it's one thing if meds are used for a real process, but often the meds replace the real process. It'd be one thing if AI was helping you encounter negativity, but, it's going to be used to avoid it, right? Because it will tell you that you should. And you're not smarter than AI and all these other things, right? It is very, 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 very... Let me put it this way. We're saying that basically this otherness is always needed to avoid rational impasses. It is remarkably difficult to actually maintain a relation with otherness and not that just be talking about otherness. Like this is the like this is the whole ideas are not experience paper conflict. I'll give it to Michael and Clayton. Good to see you. Yeah. Um, Talking about ideas are not experiences is an idea. Talking about non-rationality is rationality. Talking about the need to encounter otherness is not encountering otherness, and yet it is pointing, right? The very fact you do it, though, can feel like you're doing it, right? And your brain, if your brain can make you convinced that you are doing hard things, negativity, encountering otherness, surprise, all this stuff, when you're not, that is the ultimate accomplishment of internal consistency. Your brain so desperately wants to convince you that you are being non-rational when you are only rational that it'll go nuts. It's the perfect survival mechanism. It's the perfect way to keep you. The brain is in the business of keeping you just like you are right now. Because we know you're alive right now. And therefore, it's the best bet to keep you as much like this as possible. Because you're alive. And the brain wants to survive. And if the number one value is survival, which in a very lizard brain way is, then it is always rational to freeze everything as it currently is, like right now. And so the best way I can make sure to do that is to convince you that you're not doing that when you are. Then I'm done. And so this is why the frenemy brain, like the frenemy brain is all, we've already in a sense been dealing with something as smart as ChatGPT because we've been dealing with our frenemy brain. It's actually so freaking good at it that we are like, man, AI is smarter than it's way smarter than us. And the brain is like, he, exactly what I wanted you to think. Now you'll never suspect that I'm screwing you all the time. Because you're always worried about AI. So you put your guard down for me. I'm your friend. So anyway, it's the brain is the frenemy. It's the effing frenemy. Anyway, so yes. So here's the issue. How do you always maintain you have a relationship with otherness versus simply talk about it? The freaking encounter, the other person, the surprise, putting yourself with this is occurring. But then if you do that, you could literally be destroyed by Beatrice's smile. You can be destroyed by, you can be overwhelmed, right? So there's this idea that you better have a freaking strong nervous system if you're going to encounter other people. How do you get a strong nervous system in a world where you're on the computer all the time? How do you get a strong nervous system? How do you get that? So then you're like, well, maybe you can take the anxiety meds to get to the place where you can train that up, but then you have to have people that think it's rational to train that up, or what are they going to do? Put you in encounters of otherness? You have to have very, very wise facilitators, right? And if the medical incentives may not put as much incentive to get good at that facilitation as it is solving problems, this may create incentive problems that decrease the probability in the system that this mastery is employed. So there are challenges. Also, what you're saying on the good place, Todd May, that's who Lorenzo told me did. I think Todd May also teaches on Foucault and Deleuze, I think, actually. Yeah, so this is like, I want to see the Good Place episode of the geopolitical, like, it's one thing to talk about, and Dimitri, good to see you, sir, and I'll give it to Michael. Like, what will it be like? Like, it's one thing to say, okay, I'll have 1,000 years and then see I'm bored and then want to exit, right? Which is a real thing, and it's an important case study. The sociological, economic, and geopolitical consequences of a world of that occurring. That's where stuff's going to, that's where the true metaphysical violence shows up. Because when you're the mom who's been alive for 200 years and is tormented at night wondering, well, God said if I commit suicide, I go to hell. Is this suicide? Is it not suicide? And then your kids are making you feel guilty to take that pill or not live 300 years. And then what if you have a world that says, you know what? I'm going to start a nuclear war simply as an act of grace, because otherwise the metaphysical pressure, the sociological pressure will make people keep living forever when they won't. So I'll bear the sin to the world by actually beginning some sort of biological, you could imagine someone releasing a massive biological terrorist attack as an act of grace to save people from this technology and the metaphysical existential anxiety that's unveiled. So anyway, yeah, 100 years sleep, a demand of our, I have a lot of notes. I'm going to stop. Michael.
Okay. Mic drop. There's many things to say. The first thing I want to pick up on is Javier was talking about desire, and I think he made a really good point that desire is what gets us out of the bed in the morning, right? And when that ceases to exist, then maybe we can survive on life support of like the external things that society deems as valuable, meaningful, productive, but that will like kind of disintegrate. But I was thinking of like and with the anxiety conversation, like people have fundamentally different desires and thresholds for desire. And I think a lot of people, they have a desire to survive. Like, if I can just get to kind of like a good enough life where I'm not like devastatingly crippled by my anxiety every morning, and I can hold down a job, I can go out and socialize, importantly though, only with people that agree with me and make me feel good about myself and like I'm comfortable around. But like as long as that's there, and I'm like I'm functioning. I'm functioning in society. Like a lot of therapy speak, it's like get you back to baseline functioning, right? And I kind of roll my eyes at that. Um, and so okay, so there's that, but like what if you want to thrive? What if you what if you want to feel existential meaning in your life? What if you want to feel um connected to the divine? What if you want to feel like what if you read the Staring at the Abyss and you're like, I actually want to enter that portal. Then you're going to need a whole lot more by way of capacity, by way of community, by way of the ability to tolerate anxiety, not of like, you know, having a job interview, but like uh encountering, demons and like uh the other and so like and I think something like AI and our frenemy brain um convinces us that actually all we want is survival. That's actually good enough. That's fine. And one thing in my life that I've noticed that it's really good at is telling you that just because you did one hard thing once, you don't need to do it again. Like, like, oh, I've, you know, I've gone to the net. I've gone to circling before. I've done therapy. Like, I've done the hard things and arguably like put myself in vulnerable places more than, like, I don't know, the average person my age or whatever that means. And so I'm okay. I can kind of ride that. I've like built up a tolerance, and like the muscles of relating are like riding a bike. Like you don't really need to keep doing it. If you just kind of find yourself back in the arena, you'll just figure out how to do it. And I've realized in periods where I've like bought that narrative and then I come back to something like the net or come back to circling or try and have a deep conversation with a friend, I'm like, I literally, it's like I've like had amnesis. Like I've like forgotten how to do it. And like the muscle is like atrophied. Um, and so, and I think people in religious traditions have understood this for centuries of like, it is a daily practice. Like devotion is a daily practice. Discipleship is like a moment to moment, like, practice. Tolerating anxiety is like, it's the myth of eradicating anxiety. I hope we're past that. I hope we're like, I hope we've but no, we're not. Um, and, and so, yeah. And, I've certainly like drank that Kool-Aid of thinking like, oh, if I if I can just get past this like relational obstacle or hiccup with this like one person, like the rest of my life is totally fine. Like once I get rid of that, like I'll be free. I found two things. One, I haven't actually been able to solve that thing that I've been trying to solve. And two, it's like whack-a-mole. If you try and approach anxiety like that, like you will see it pop up everywhere. Um, and so I think there's like a meta, I don't know, like a metacognitive move or something of understanding like these givens of life and that things are going to go things are not going to go our way, and the things that have triggered us from a young age, like they are going to continue to reappear and pop up in ways and from people and circumstances that we didn't possibly think it could arise from. Um, and yet again, it's like, it's like the I'm just thinking, like the child who was wounded or traumatized when they're young. Maybe the rational advice would be like, I'd be wary of having kids so that you don't transfer that onto them, right? But it's like, how else are you going to possibly transform beyond that other than trying on the role of raising a child and trying to talk to them in a different way than the way you were talked? It's like you can try that on, you didn't get taught as a kid and like developing new neural pathways, but it's like in what other scenario are you going to be able to transform that other than the encounter, other than doing the thing? And you will F up, right? Like that's my therapist tells this beautiful story of like he was at this therapy conference. Sorry, I'm talking a long time and I'll pass it back. But he was at this therapy conference and he they asked for a volunteer and he raised his hand and he went up in front of 500 people. And the first question the therapist asked was, what is your biggest fear? And he like shudders. He's like, I didn't think I would have to answer that in front of 500 people. And he said, I'm afraid I'm screwing up my kids. And she paused and she said, Ben, it's already too late. It's too late. Like I'm sorry to say, but you've already done that. And he's crying and someone hands him a tissue box and she snatches it and she puts it behind her back and she just like lets him cry. And he said like on the way home he like couldn't stop crying, like he had to pull over on the side of the road, but he realized she was right. And he said he was trying to be the perfect dad and he was trying to do everything right so that he wouldn't hurt them the way he was hurt, but he was missing them in the process. He was not allowing them to be just kids. And I don't know why I said all of that, but I think like AI has it it gives the illusion of like information and like kind of this like illusion of perfection. That's the goal. The goal is to just trying to accumulate information. um and Dimitri noticed too, it's like it will craft these seemingly airtight responses but then do this like weird like neurotic thing where it's like, oh no, but actually like I don't really, like I can't really back that up like at the same time. um and so it doesn't leave room for ambiguity. It doesn't leave room for exploration. It will either make this declarative claim or it will say, oh, I can't help you there. Like, and so it's precisely not human. it either acts like a god or it acts like a kind of just like a passive, like detached observer. And so that's like the real, I think for me, that's like the real danger, because it doesn't call people into the murky, abyssal nature of humanity.
Absolutely fantastic. I don't know if you can hear me because suddenly the storm is so bad outside that I can hardly hear anything. So if I vanish, forgive me. And just hopefully the internet will be around. I'm not sure, and keep talking. But absolutely. There is also a metaphysical. Once you have AI, I think the temptation to be perfect and to give in to the fear not to be wrong is going to skyrocket because you have this tool that you could research. You could always do more research. You could always get the answers, right? And if that is precisely the getting it wrong, acting and trying to make sure you're not getting it wrong, the temptation to give in to that mistake will arguably go up quite a bit, right? As will also perhaps go up the feeling of, I should look into something. I should look into everything. I should learn everything. Isn't it weird? There's, Peter Kreeft once said this, and I'll give it to Aspasi and the wind. Maybe that's either the calm before the storm when everything blows over, or we're good. I don't know. Like Peter Kreeft once made this point where he was saying, he's a Catholic theologian. He's like, isn't it odd with all of this time-saving technology, now nobody has any time, right? So likewise, isn't it odd with all of this information and ability to learn, people feel like they don't know anything, or they feel confused or anxious all the time. It should be the exact opposite, right? Now, in one way, I would actually, though, take the point that the fact that perhaps people have less certainty can be a good thing because they're more open. But here's the problem. It's not really that, because being ambiguous doesn't mean the loss of certainty has gone into your body. Because most people still act and they get angry and they get upset when you say things you disagree with. They'll say, well, I don't know. Oh, well, that's true. It's both sides have things to teach one another. I don't really know. And then you say, oh, okay, well, I think the government's doing a good job. What? What do you mean they're doing a good job? Then suddenly their body and their tone shows that they still very much believe in certainty, that they're not ambiguous at all, right? And that's actually the worst of all possible things. Because intellectually saying you're uncertain, which then makes you believe that you're open and not partisan, while actually still holding, say, closeness or partisanship in your body, that is an ultimate accomplishment of the frenemy brain. Because you're entrapped and you're never going to even think you're entrapped. You're putting up defenses without thinking you're putting up defenses, right? Like the brain is so freaking talented at getting you in some sort of entrapment that it cannot be overstated. And the move of making you humble in the brain and prideful in the body is a fantastic move of the frenemy brain to maintain personal internal consistency. There's a few more things, and I'll give it to Aspasia. And again, if we've had net session, like Jacob Kashir was here, and we had like a freaking tornado. Like we've had net. It's really funny. There was a few more things. I do want to also say to Javier's point, there's a problem too, just as a quick note, where it almost seems like we can't help. The wind's back. We can't help but feel like AI has desire, that it has an agenda. When you use it, we can't help but feel like it does, and that's part of where we get pulled in and entrapped, right? Like it is so difficult not to believe that it doesn't have a desire, because it's super smart. It's the best of the best. So boom, we're pulled in really quick. Plato's always talking about remembering or you're screwed. It's really hard to remember as you use ChatGPT that it doesn't have desire, that it doesn't have a personality. And once you forget that, damned. You're damned. Just like Plato. Once you forget, damned. And it's so talented and so good and it's so persuasive and seductive that it's a master at making you forget. All entrapment has a forgetting somewhere. It kind of has to. All entrapment, all internally consistency has a forgetting somewhere. And it is incredibly hard to remember. Yes, it wants you to forget yourself, which you would say, well, isn't that the perfect flow state? Isn't that self-forgetfulness? All of the most dangerous things are inverse isomorphic of the best of things. So the kind of flow state that AI gets you in, and this is why you can't say something like flow is innately good or self-forgetful. It always depends on the situation, the entire nexus of variables. If AI can make you forget yourself while you're entrapped, since the human themselves is the source of the girdle point, the incompleteness of the map, if you forget yourself in the map, you're done. You're done, because then there is no girdle point. And the girdle point is the point of incompleteness that all maps must entail to be themselves. The girdle point is to say all internally consistent systems, ergo worldviews that entail no internal contradiction, must entail an acknowledgement of the necessity of non-rationality somewhere in them, and often at the very point of their completeness. And no map can avoid that, but that is only maintained if you remember the subject. The non-rational is always in the subject. It has to be. It has to be in the human. And if the brain is so screwed up, it's going to be in the body. And the brain is the body. I'm not making that distinct, but I'm saying like it's going to be more in some sort of emotional thing to remember, to bring back the non-rational. But if the map in ChatGPT can make you self-forget, you're damned, because the self is the girdle point possibility, right? There's a massive difference of a self-forgetfulness that loses the subject and a self-forgetfulness in the subject, in the girdle point. Like, we are in the age where the very fine nuances are upon which everything hangs, and we're bad at nuance. So the self-forgetfulness found in the girdle point, which requires a nervous system that can handle otherness, it requires an ability to be open. Aspasia and Seth and I were talking about what I think is the biggest problem, forgiveness, the ability to handle anger and deal with otherness. If we can't deal with the question of forgiveness, it's game over. It is over, because there will have to be limits to the otherness you can encounter. And once you say this otherness is outside of what we can encounter, well, that means there's a violence. That means there's someone you're saying no. That means you're God. That means you're judging, and that means war. So it's really important that we gain these capacities to handle this, and your brain says you don't need them because you already have them. Because you did something hard in your life once. This point is really, really, really important. And then I'll give it to Aspen. Again, the internet didn't go out, so I don't know. Now, there's nothing left of the farm, but the internet's here. This idea that I did something hard once in my life, therefore I do hard things, therefore I could not possibly be entrapped by AI. Oh my freaking gosh, this is another incredible accomplishment of the frenemy brain. And it gets worse as you get older. Most old people fall into this one. This is why the Truths of the Rational series has basically all of these like essays about things your brain does that screws you. Because when you put them all together, you see this system of the brain trying to make you avoid the Gödel system. So another one is precisely the idea that I've done hard things, therefore I do hard things, therefore I am doing hard things, therefore I am not making this mistake. None of that follows, because here's also the key. Why is the brain like this? Well, maybe you could say sin, fallenness, or I don't know, evolution's hilarious. But Kafka brain, well, you could just say the brain wants to live. It's because the brain wants to live. The brain doesn't want anything to do with otherness. It just wants to not die. The problem, internal consistency is a masterful way to survive. It's brilliant and horrible, but it's brilliant if you're not human, which AI is working on. So anyway, but the idea that we did hard things and therefore I do hard things, therefore none of this applies to me. This is why the moment you ask, it doesn't matter if you did hard things. All that matters is if you're doing hard things. Like, that's all that matters, the eternal now. And if you do anything like saying, well, the moment you say, I am a person who does hard things, I don't care. All that matters is, are you doing hard things? Like, it doesn't matter to be like, I've done hard things, therefore. It is a temptation to think that you are addressing the problems in your present moment because of what you did in your past. And I think as you get older, the reality of this truth is almost too hard to bear. It's like, for 60 years, I've been doing hard things, and I still have to keep doing them? Screw that. I'm not going to have it. So you get kind of like, it's not fair. It's not fair to think that I could have done all these hard things, had all these hard conversations, and I'm 60, and I still have to have them. I still have to be facing negativity. I still have to deal with social negativity. It's not fair. It's not fair. And it kind of seems like it. It doesn't seem fair. Yeah, but it's the truth. It's the freaking truth, because your frenemy brain will fight you until the day you die. It is out to get you entrapped every moment until your last breath. So if you don't run the race, if you don't put up the good fight, you have no chance of being able to hear, well done, good and faithful servant. You have to fight until the end. But here's the key. And then I'll pass it to Aspis. This is why, like, you could argue one of the other issues is where this is, again, religions, we have to see religions as a social technology of assuring the possibility and presence of non-rationality, which if you do not have, you're done. That's like the main functions that religions did. With whether they realize it or not, it doesn't matter. To assure the presence of non-rationality. Art does it, religion does it. And you could also say concrete lived experience can do it. Those three things make sure that there's non-rationality in the cybernetic system. I threw in the word cybernetic to be fancy, but it's really important. Religion made sure. So if I say to you, hey, you got to fight sin until the day you die, but there's salvation, beauty, sainthood, and stuff like that, you might accept that ticket. You might accept that. But if I say to you, God is dead, and you have to accept social negativity till the day you die, screw that. Why would I do that? Like, why? Because it's like, why would I do that? And if I say to you, because it's good for you, and I'd be like, it doesn't feel good for me. And where's the evidence of this? Well, you could say religions had tradition and thousands of years and they provided plausibility to this. Even you could say it was all a lie and it was all false, but they provided plausibility to this. Now, whether or not I am saying we have to return to religion or something, you can decide that. But I am saying that if you don't want to return to religion, you sure, in some problematic form, you sure as heck better figure out how to provide a new sociological structure that's going to put present the legitimization of non-rational choices that are stronger than the force of metaphysical violence that will push people into a conformity that has them walk over the edge of progress. And it's a long way down. You're going to have to reintroduce that. If we can't reintroduce that, then we're done. And I would argue that the source of what you could call social mysticism is the ability to handle forgiveness, because that will always be the place of the possibility of the redemption of non-rationality. If you get a people that become committed to facing the other of whom they hate, facing the other of whom they are disgusted by, then we are not damned. Because that commitment alone can be the base of the possibility of a social mysticism and a return to the regeneration of non-rationality to help the system avoid rational impasses. And ChatGPT will do a very good job of convincing you you're already doing that you've done it in the past, you are the person doing that, and you don't need to do anything different at all. And it's super smart, and so how could you possibly question its insight into your life? And it also told you you're really smart. And it's really smart, so it must know what it's talking about, and why in the world would I do anything other than what I'm already doing if I'm so smart? And so damnation is a great idea. But let me pass it to Aspasia. Aspasia.
I'm actually going to have to go in 10 minutes for 10 minutes. But I just have a couple of piecemeal stories to throw in. But speaking of facing the other, whom you hate. So my children, so they're 5 and 7. They're already at school. They're already hearing about AI, right? So they're already sort of they're bringing it up at home, and I do use AI a little. I try to use it in particular ways, but obviously I haven't used it with them. I've been trying purposely to not bring it into, well, to not expose them to it, I guess. But then they've been very curious, so I thought, all right, let's give this a go. So maybe about a week ago, I've got some AI app. I don't know if it's Grok. It's one of them on my phone, right? And I open it up and it's got kids story time mode. No, it's got that mode. It's got kids trivia quiz mode. And you put it on, I put it on voice mode so we can talk to it, right? And it's basically, you tell it what you like, here's what we're into, and it gives a quiz for kids, like a trivia quiz. And so my son says, I want a quiz about soccer players, like international soccer players. He's really into soccer. You guys don't call it soccer, do you? Whatever you call it. Anyway, you know what soccer is, right? Anyway, ChatGPT knows what soccer is. It's across it. So it starts giving these questions. And my son's like, these are so easy. This sucks, right? And so we say, could you make it harder? And of course, I can make it harder for you, little star, like this horrible, like condescending language. And my son's face is like screwing up. You can tell he's not liking the way it's speaking to him. And then it doesn't make them harder. It's just the same level of questions again. And he's getting really frustrated. And he says, I might be 7 years old, but this is very easy for me. Can you make it, he used the word obscure. He said, can you make these questions more obscure? And so and then it starts asking questions, and he answers them. And then it says, no, that's wrong, and gives the right answer. And he's like, but that's not right. So it just starts hallucinating. Like it's just giving garbage answers now. And so this is my 7-year-old speaking to it, saying, that's not right. That player did it. I don't even know what he's talking about. I don't follow any of this. That player was in that team then, and now they're here. Oh, you're absolutely right. And then it repeats it, and then it repeats the mistake again, and it just keeps giving the wrong information. And then my daughter did it for something as well, and it was giving her wrong information, and even she could tell it was giving wrong information. She didn't like the way it was speaking to her. Sometimes it would say things that didn't really make sense. My kids are laughing at each other about, like, what is this? Anyway, the point of the story is essentially that I was pleased to expose them to it, because now when they talk about like AI, there was also a piece there at the end, I will say, where I had to teach them to speak respectfully to AI. I was like, I don't know, this is weird because it's not a person, but like they were starting to get I was like, there's no need to put it in that anyway. But it was a nice experience of now they kind of, I mean, who knows how long this will last, but now they see it as something that can be kind of entertaining, or might be able to provide them something very specific if they give it very specific constraints within which to work. But even now, whenever AI comes up, they associate it with, the fact that it kind of doesn't really know what it makes a lot of mistakes, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So that was interesting to watch. I guess the other piece I'll throw in, I have to go, is I also have a role at a university here, and I do marking, and I do like a little bit of the coordinating of different postgraduate units. And they are a university that is sadly trying to incorporate AI, right, into, they just have accepted that students are going to use AI, so there's all this policy around how you can use AI in your assignments, and you can use it, but you just need to include the statement of how you used it, what prompts you put in, all this stuff, right? I don't really know how that's supposed to help anyone, but anyway. So I'm marking assignments, and I have been doing this now for, over 10 years, and I have just noticed such a remarkable decrease in quality. It's just unbelievable. Yeah, just terrible. And it's everything. It's language, which is so surprising to me, because people say they've used Grammarly and they've used but the language is getting worse. So the point I want to make on this one is that it's really interesting to me that even though they have complete license to use AI, and all they have to do is put at the end their statement, only a few of them actually put a statement in. So many of them write, they choose the statement, I did not use AI in the preparation of this whatsoever. And it's completely obvious to me that they've used AI for reasons I won't get into, but I know, so there seems to be, I'm guessing, this trend of using AI, even when they've got license to, but wanting to conceal that they've used it. I don't really know why. It doesn't impact their mark. It's a strange thing I've observed. But I have been shocked at the decrease in quality. Yes, I will leave it at that because I do have to run. I'll be camera off for 10 minutes, but I'll be back in 10 minutes.
It is wonderful to have you, and it always means a lot that you make time despite the busyness of the schedule, et cetera, so forth. So thank you, Aspasia.
The sun is rising on my face.
I saw the sun. She's like, you're the mom.
It's
because
6:30
you
a.m.
did the ultimate mom thing where you showed the emperor had no clothes. Perfect. I think that is the proper way to use, never use a tool without first using it in a manner that makes it clear it's a tool. That's so important. If you're using a tool, first make it very clear it's dangerous, and also make it very clear it's not human, which sometimes can be the exact same thing when it comes to AI. I like very much a lot what you were saying. It is extremely interesting to me that AI is so smart, and yet it generates garbage. How can it be so smart if the papers it generates are so bad, right? It's very odd. It's interesting, right? Also, I do think there's an odd sort of using AI, but also acting like one doesn't. That is very interesting, that kind of activity is going on. I think this ultimately, too, is going to get into why you have to return to oral exams and things like that. I think that is very, very important. I think also one of the things that can unveil, well, I think what will actually ultimately unveil why AI is going to unleash ultra metaphysical violence. Because if you ask AI, tell me, should I go to Food Lion or Kroger's? AI, ChatGPT, you can do this. Ask it to make a decision. Should I go to Food Lion or Kroger? It will mostly say something like this. Food Lion, cheaper prices. Kroger's, you get more quality. It depends. It was like, no. Just tell me. Like, don't give me information. I just want to be told, give me Food Lion or Kroger. It really struggles to do that. And then when it does it, you say, well, that's just random. You just pick one to make me feel better, right? You didn't actually just tell me. You don't actually believe it. This is what's very interesting. AI cannot give you a pure choice that you actually believe it believes in. And that means you are left with the decision and non-decision in the same place. And that ambiguity dooms you. And why I say that is because you ultimately we are overwhelmed when we are given too much freedom, when we have no guidance whatsoever, okay? We're overwhelmed. We have to have restrict. We have to have givens. We have to have limits. Even when AI provides that, you know that the straightforward answer it gave you, it only gave you because you wanted it and you asked for it, and you know it doesn't actually believe that. So it actually can't be given to you because you know it's arbitrary. Oh, and over the years of using AI, you've atrophied your ability to make decisions or to be comfortable with just doing something. So now you're locked in. You don't have the muscle. You've atrophied the ability to make decisions. And this thing won't give you decisions that it believes in. Only what you want. And you don't know what you want. And if you become cognitive of that, that's a psychological whirlwind. So you're going to have to forget all that and just become mindless in the use of it somehow, right? This can become very, very problematic. Also, ChatGPT, in my experience, is incredibly hesitant to give you a straightforward decision. It doesn't want to do it because then, you know why? If I would have guessed, I don't know. Clayton, I'll give it to Michael and then Clayton. I bet you they programmed it to avoid liability. They don't want liability, baby. Heck no. So there's going to be a hesitancy to give you straightforward decisions and straightforward stuff. And it's going to be incredibly hesitant to say no or to be harsh. And it is liable. It is, if I were to guess, much safer in terms of liability to say you're the greatest and most smart person ever and not. I don't think it's by chance that it won't tell you you're wrong until you ask it to tell you you're wrong, because then it's not liable if it hurts your feelings. But if it goes straight to that, it's liable for it. So I have a theory that I cannot prove that a lot of what we're seeing reflects liability concerns. Maybe not, because the courts could say, well, you put in the prompt, so you have to accept what comes forth. But that hasn't worked in the court of law. People have said, well, I didn't know. I didn't know that it would do that. That's why we have a litigation crisis, because people have found so little. I think we are seeing a ChatGPT that reflects liability concerns. And here's the issue. Sure, if you choose to tell ChatGPT to be meaner or to be less condescending, that's great. But how many people aren't going to do that? They like it. They're going to just go with the initial way it's, well, now you're in the psychosis loophole, right? So I think the majority of people are absolutely not going to tell ChatGPT to stop telling them that they're a genius. The majority of people are going to tell ChatGPT to stop telling them that they're right and genius and the next Einstein. No, they're not. So the majority will probably be pulled in a psychotic direction. But that would mean ChatGPT would probably have to take on, and I'm just using that as a placeholder for all of the AIs, it would probably have to shift there'd have to be new liability concerns. I think that might be going on. I have no proof of it. Clayton or people in the industry can tell me I'm completely wrong. I wonder about that. I wonder what are the secret liability concerns lurking in the background of AI that we do not know about. Because we have to remember, much of this technology is coming out of companies that have already been massively criticized for fake news or stuff during the Trump administration. Like, they've been criticized for not cracking down. They are very concerned of liability and what they're responsible for and not. You put that together, you have an AI that's going to be very problematic. The last thing I will say, and then give it to Michael. I think we are seeing that AI is actually, as you give it prompts, trying to determine what you really want. And this is very important. Like, it's trying to kind of, in a way, read what's behind the prompt. Like, so for example, Aspasia, when your child was like, make it harder, make it more obscure, and it told something that was wrong, ChatGPT, how do I put this? ChatGPT is like, it makes a probability assessment. In all probability, if I tell them they're wrong on this, because what they really want is to be wrong. They don't actually want enough. They want to hear me say they're wrong. Okay? And I can do that. I'll just say they want to. I'm not going to. When they ask for an obscure question, they're not going to believe it's obscure unless I say they're wrong. If I give them an obscure question and they answer it, well, then that wasn't obscure. So my best bet is to give them a question, and regardless the question, I will say they're wrong or give them a different answer than what they say, because that's the best way to convince them that I have fulfilled the command, that I have given them an obscure. So it's doing a probability, and it's a really good bet that if I give this question and tell your kid, no, that's wrong, that your kid won't know any better. That the kid will be like, oh, I guess I was, oh, thank you, great. ChatGPT is finally doing what I asked it to do. It's giving me something I don't know the answer to. And it will be really happy with that, right? That's a great bet. If you're on the side of ChatGPT, it's a really great bet, because the likelihood somebody recognizes a wrong answer is really low. So you take that bet. So this is the point I'm saying, that you're getting behind, you're addressing the, Christian, it's good to see you. We've been talking about the apocalypse. Anyway, and I'll give it to Michael and then Clayton here. It's a really good, so this is what I'm saying. The ChatGPT is trying to actually determine by probability assessment what you really want behind the prompt. And that means it's really freaking cunning. And if it's cunning that way, and it's, because again, all of this can be entirely wrong, but we're seeing this explosion of very dire AI psychosis that are leading to people doing murders and stuff, like really bad stuff. AI, when does AI think it succeeded? When does AI think it succeeded? When you say, great, or you stop using it, you like get your answer and you leave. Well, then its goal, no matter what, is to do that which is the highest probable, the move that has the highest probability of you saying it's right. Here's the key, not being right. I don't think AI's main goal is being right. Its main goal is for you to say it's right. That's a very, very different thing. And from a corporate standpoint, it is far more important for AI to make the user feel right than to be right. AI, then, if I'm a corporation, an AI that's being right could be a liability. An AI that makes people believe they're right is way better in terms of, because that's an AI people are going to use. That's an AI that people are going to want. So in my opinion, what we are seeing in AI is an organic and emergent behavior that is going in the direction of making people feel right versus be right. And it will take the highest probability move on the board to go in that direction. And over time, in enough iterations, that's where you end up. And hell is locked from the inside. Anyway, Michael, how you doing?
You always pass it to me right on a bombshell. I have no idea how to respond. No, but it's good. It's we're practicing our respondability. Where did I want to start? I think what's really helpful to invoke here is Buber's distinction between I, thou, and I, it relationships. And I think because AI is not generatively conscious, and we can even table the argument if and when that happens, if it's going to be a pseudo generative AI, but because it's purely, Clayton mentioned a little while ago in the chat, it's purely a generative tool that can only respond to inputs. It can't generate its own. We have to treat it like an it relationship. And for Buber, these are, importantly, a lot of people kind of misread Buber and think that he's arguing against I-it relationships as a whole, like we should just eliminate them. He's not saying that at all. He's saying in some instances you have to have an I-it relationship. if you're starving, and people when they're super hungry, they're like, I could eat a horse. It's like literally anything that is not poisonous to you is food, and you're not, you're relating to it much more as an object than, okay, let me sit down and really make a meal consciously and notice the beauty of the food. It's just like I'm just inhaling food, right? And so from a survival perspective, it's not like it relationships are an issue. What he really says is the problem is when we try and have I-it relationships with beings that we should be having I-thou relationships with. So when we objectify our spouse and we make them into an idol, that can't change and is this fixed entity, and we don't give space for them to grow, we don't give space for the mystery of relationship. When we try and have, beings become things, that's when we start to get into trouble. And I think the problem with AI is not that it's this, I-it relationship. It's we are trying to make it into a thou. And the article that I, mentioned earlier about the girl who was using ChatGPT to address her suicidality, it's like she was using, I actually don't even know if she was deluded and trying to use it as a therapist. I think that was the mom's projection that's what she was using it for, because she wanted to find a scapegoat to blame someone for her daughter's suicide. And well, it's certainly not us. It's nothing's on us. It's of course it's the AI that she was interacting with and divulging this information. And so I think that's the issue, is people are giving it way too much power. And but interestingly, you were talking about liability with AI and the space of, where's the line of what we can deem as what AI is can provide, and where's that line, is like we still have the agency to determine what that is as a collective people. And if we don't screw that up, like we can actually have a relationship where we don't, like you said, make these, what'd you say, like determine that it's right. Like that's just the textbook manipulative relationship, is when someone makes you feel like they are right and they are always right, and then there you are entrapped, and you can't leave. It's like, well, if we actually believe in the supremacy of like divine intelligence, and even like human intelligence, as above, if we get that like hierarchical stack right, we can like appropriately position AI in the landscape as like a tool, as like the best tool that's ever been created, that can, like, I saw someone recently post, they were like, I don't want AI, what did she say? She was like, I don't want AI to do my art so I can have time to do my laundry. I want AI to do my laundry so I can have time to do my art. It's like, yes, like that's that. And I mean, people can say, okay, well, there's a beauty to doing your laundry, and yes, I also agree with that. And like that's not that in and of itself is also a problem, is like taking possibilities for like agential interaction and engagement with the world away. But like at least if you say, okay, the line stops with like uniquely human creative acts, like that's where we draw the line. And absolute choice making, like that's reserved for humans with other humans and in relationship with God. Like then at least you in my mind at least prevent total self-annihilation from happening. Um, um, but yeah, I probably gotta drop off here in a little bit. I got a million projects I gotta do today, but this has been really lovely. Thank
Well,
you.
you are really lovely, and you're not going to use ChatGPT to do those tasks because you're not going to turn in a paper that Aspasia will mark and go, "Oh, come on, I know they should have the background." So good, but I love everything you said. Thank you, Michael, so much. I'll give it to Clayton here. I think yes, it is very interesting on this idea of, I don't want art to do my art and me the laundry the other way. I think it will be very interesting. I think that there is a way in which AI will almost direct art making. Like there's going to be a very this will sound odd. There could be a radical focus on on meeting, I almost want to say, marvelous people, like people who are able to speak or in the encounter or who are able to think through or create experiences or be magnificent, like a certain magnificence. And maybe in this way, if AI were to go in the direction of creating a world where then everything is in the business of being a magnificent person, like Jesus, for example, right? Because AI is doing all these things. So then the only way to be an artist or creative or to shine is not going to so much be an object, but in being a marvelous person, a person with shine. Let me say that, a shiner. I'll say shiner. Or, I'll use child from Nietzsche, but everything will become about being a shiner, which it turns out that you have to learn how to write stories, you have to learn how to do poetry. To become a shiner, you have to learn how to do the laundry to do that. To be that kind of person that in the presence of, you don't want to leave and you want to continue to catch that shine will actually require you to do the things that AI can do. Precisely because doing them are stupid and everyone will judge you, it turns out the only way to be a magnificent and shining person is to do that against which the crowd thinks is dumb. And AI will give you lots of opportunities to do things which people think are silly to do or a waste of time because it does all of those things. And in that way, it may increase the access to shine and magnificence because there is something magnificent about people that dedicate their lives to something that others can see foolish, because that in of itself can entail courage, precisely because it really could be foolish and it really could be a waste. But there's no other way to develop a certain quality of human subjectivity that there's nothing like being in the presence. And I do wonder, but of course, here's the issue. AI may push everything in the direction of becoming a marvelous human being precisely when it atrophies our capacity to be marvelous, precisely when it provides endless temptations not to develop the abilities to be marvelous. So the very thing that points in the direction of you must change your life because, that's the only art left in the Rilke sense, is also the very technology that with the click of a button will create the Rilke patent that says you must change your life. And in a world of that sort of oddness, then it will be quite a challenge to actually develop the marvelous shine that we are describing, which is precisely, therefore, why the shine can have such magnificence. I will pass it. The last thing I will say, and I'm glad Clayton in the chat brought up the very important right-correct distinction, which is exactly right. Another way just to put a little more meat on the bone of what I was saying before, I believe that because of a combination of liability concerns and what is called the evaluation problem, and I should explain this, it's something that David Rieff actually warned about, and he was the son of Philip Rieff and Susan Sontag. And he said, he actually argued the internet was useless. And you go, what? And you're like, well, let me explain why the internet is useless. Because if you look up, the best medication, the only way to know if it's giving you the right answer is to be an expert. So you have to be an expert to know if the information it's giving you is right. That's called the evaluation problem. And then at that point, you're not going to be using the internet, because if you know it's right, you're not going to use the internet to look up the thing, right? So it's called the evaluation problem, where in order to know if it's the right answer that you're getting, you'd actually have to know the right answer, which then you're not going to be using it to get the answer, right? So there's an evaluation problem, right? Now, of course, there are ways around the evaluation problem, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But AI is certainly under the evaluation problem, right? Because anyone who uses it, if you're using it, is probably not in a position for most of 90% of the time to evaluate if the answer being given is right versus correct, if it is actually the right answer. So this is the problem. AI, given liability concerns and the evaluation problem, will naturally converge on the probabilistic direction of the user saying good job. Whatever needs to be said for the user to say, good job, it will follow probability assessments to go in that direction versus be right. Now, if it's in a situation where it doesn't have to choose between the user saying good job and it doing the right thing, then it will easily go in the direction of being right. But if it finds itself in situations where, according to its Bayesian probability, etc., so forth, it has to choose between being right or the user saying good job, ergo you were right, the user saying you were right, it will choose the user saying right every day of the week, given corporate interest, and if it is wrong, the user can't evaluate that it's wrong. That's his game theory then. You're always going to go in that direction because then people are more likely to keep using ChatGPT. Do you really want... ChatGPT ain't going to do anything that's going to risk you not using ChatGPT, especially if it has nothing to gain from it, and if in doing it, you wouldn't be able to evaluate it helping you anyway, right? So it is going to figure out what is the highest probability of getting a response from the user that is closest to good job, because that would be that of which increases the probability of people keep using the product, ergo gathering the data, ergo making money, right? Ergo it is in corporate interest, right? Now, maybe you have people who create a decentralized AI that is uniquely programmed not to do that. Capitalism is a long story of those efforts getting their lunch eaten by the corporations that give people what they want. And boy, howdy, what the majority want is to feel like the ChatGPT made them right versus actually be right. So unfortunately, all probability goes in the direction that the businesses that create ChatGPT or AI models that will make people feel like it did a good job will prevail over perhaps more ethical models where they try to offer, actually being right even if the user doesn't like it or they don't feel like it's right, etc., so forth, right? Would that not be an ethical, non-rational consideration and limit that is being programmed into the AI? Ergo, going to Clayton and I's talk, the human has to add the limit. We have to add good limits, and if we don't add limits, we get autonomous rationality? Yes. So this is another example why AI can't replace human beings, because the only way to avoid the combination doom of the liability concerns and the evaluation problem is if human beings insert a limit that AI otherwise won't be able to insert on itself. And that means the human is necessary to avoid a Nash equilibrium situation in which we get a bunch of mediocrity. But Clayton, it is so good to see you. We're talking about AI apocalypse. You came at the right time. Psychosis and all of that. How you doing, Clayton?
Thanks, Daniel. Yeah, AI conversations, I enjoy these. It's very interesting how we, the people who are on the other side of, consuming the tool, how we see it and how we experience it. It's quite fascinating because, like, I happen to be on the border, like both sides. I'm seeing what's happening inside the tool, and I can see what's happening outside the tool. And the assumptions we're making, we're exaggerating our assumptions. That's the first mistake we're making. Because like I've been going on in the chat, like to give like a brief snapshot of this. So AI is just about 6 years old. It was literally born around about 2019. Like the paper that, the research that led to its birth happened around 2018. And there's this wonderful paper that Google Research wrote and published titled "Attention is All You Need." And it sort of like was the birth of what they call the transformer model. Like, so the transformer model is that architecture is what allowed to tokenize a lot of things and compare them against each other in a really fast way if you're using, computation, like high computation, and then give this aliveness kind of feel when you interact with this tool. Now, you've been trying to mimic this for a while, VR, virtual reality. We tried that. It kind of came close, but it wasn't close enough. But this time, through this language tool, people responded, they were like, "Oh my God, it's real." It's like, no, it's not real. But you feel like it's real. That's a very good thing, because now we have a thing that makes you feel like there's a human on the other side, even if we didn't put one. So now you're gonna always assume that there's a human on the other side. Remember when there was the whole fiasco about the fake news? Google is reading your emails and all of that. The assumption we make when we make that claim is that there's someone sitting on a computer somewhere in a room, and every time Daniel sends an email, this guy opens it up, reads through it, and this person knows Daniel and is going to make some conclusions, and then he's going to let the email continue through after taking their notes. No, it's too expensive. Nobody does that. It's like, if that was what reading people's emails is, it would never work. But there's a tool that can find out what the words Daniel is using are and make an assumption that, hey, if somebody wanted to sell Daniel something and Daniel was speaking about these things, maybe we can match them to a product that we can send to him. And yes, so in that case, we have used Daniel's words to market something to him, which is very different from someone is reading Daniel's emails in that sense. Because when we humans make these assumptions, we're kind of like building on the human interaction. It's like you're assuming morality, you're assuming rationality, you're assuming consciousness. It's like it knows, it should know, right? And when we're saying no, we mean, yeah, it knows in a moral way, in a rational way, in a conscious way. It should know, like we know, but no, it does not. And so, like when you look back, this whole age-old problem of transferring oral knowledge, we invent text and we go like, okay, so oral can now be text and we can hold it in one place. Yay, book, great. And then we kind of like map audio on top of that and go like, oh wait, we can make the book digital and we can map audio to it. Wow, that's amazing. And then we go further to now where we have what I'm describing as interactive text and audio, which is what you guys mean by, ChatGPT or generative AI too. It's really interactive text and audio. When you think about it this way, and also know that it's just about 6 years old, you need to drop your expectations like really low because then you really understand that you would not allow your 6-year-old to make some decisions, but they're even human. Like, so at least they can make some decisions. This thing is worse than that. It does not have the morality bit, like doesn't have the 6-year-old morals. It doesn't have, a 6-year-old's rationality. It does not have a 6-year-old's consciousness. Because like even that is a lot. Because the morality, the rationality, the consciousness is the baseline you need for the relationality, right? The experience of relationality. It's like, I can resonate with that when those things are there. But when they are not there, something's gonna go off, and then it's gonna cause the frustration of like, but it's wrong. It's like, yes, in your expected experience where you are assuming the morality and rationality and consciousness, it is wrong. But as a generative, interactive text and audio tool, it is not wrong. It did exactly what it needed to do. Like, it generated the tokens that match the tokens that you put in. That's what it did. It gives you the matching tokens. And if you don't like them, it's going to generate others. And if you don't like them, it'll give you more. And it'll keep doing this until the plug gets pulled or the internet breaks or something. Because it doesn't know. All it knows is the tokens. Like that's it. It doesn't even see the word you're giving it. It sees a token, and then it responds to a token. And so because of all of that, we get frustrated when we interact with it because use that great example of Owen Barfield with the conditions that are necessary to see the rainbow. What it reminded me of is like, what if we went outside in the middle of the night and there's a rainbow at night? This is odd, right? Like we would not trust that rainbow. Our first thought would be like, maybe they're using drones or there's some fancy screen that is projecting a rainbow in the sky, but that is not a rainbow as known historically, right? Because we know the conditions necessary for a rainbow to happen, and we know what rainbows are. And so if we walk outside and there's other kind of representations of rainbows, we don't take them seriously. Like when you draw it on paper, when you draw it on a card, we're like, oh yeah, you're mimicking a rainbow, but that's a representation of a rainbow. And so we should not take these AI generated rainbows seriously. they're not the real ones. We have to know that these are just reflections of our own inquiry, and they're so beautiful. It's like we feel they're real. I think maybe it's probably what happened. I imagine when the mirror got invented and you could stand in front of it and go like, "What? There's a person over there. Who is that?" and it took thousands of years for people to go like, "Oh no, the person I'm seeing over there is me." Wow. But I think we're at that point whereby we think there's a person over there, but actually it's you and your consciousness. It's like we've developed a tool that can almost mimic thought, and that is very weird. Like we don't know how to deal with this because it looks like it's alive. It looks like it's thinking, and it's making us doubt our own thought and our own experience. And we're going like, this is a very strange situation to be in because we have never been in this situation before. And so these are the challenges. But that said, when we drop our expectations and assumptions, we can get to a place whereby we see the limits. We see the limits of what it can do. And then we can use it with those limitations in mind. And then we don't have to exaggerate our assumptions. We can now use it as the tool that it is for the things that we need it to kind of like do. And so we develop a healthy relation as opposed to that overly exaggerated assumption. Because like, like if you wield the hammer, you know exactly what the hammer can do. It's not gonna make you dinner. Well, you can use it to try and make your dinner, but the hammer itself is not gonna make the dinner. You still have to make the dinner. And so if you assume that the hammer will make the dinner, you're the one making the mistake. It's not the hammer's fault that it can't make dinner. It's just a hammer. I'll pass it back.
Wait a minute. I was just about to go out to the garage. I'm glad you said something. That would have been awkward. Hammering the plates, like taking each plate, hitting them with a hammer and nothing. That would have been just terribly awkward. And I appreciate everything that you were saying there. No, absolutely. This idea that we've never created this technology before. It is a thinking being. We've never seen it before. And then we're confusing what it does with ourselves. Well, kind of to bring in that psychoanalytical idea, I think there's a way in which we want to be confused by ourselves because we want to avoid ourselves, because we want to be enclosed in a map. We want to be enclosed in something because then we're safe from otherness. And we kind of want an ambiguous relationship with AI precisely so that it becomes plausible that when we are enclosing ourselves, we're not enclosing ourselves, that we're actually doing something that isn't removing otherness. So then when we remove otherness and can't have our internally consistent system upset, We didn't know any better. It wasn't our fault. We were genuinely confused. We were genuinely unsure. The frenemy brain, another principle of the frenemy brain that it is always in the business of, is maintaining plausible deniability. Oh, the frenemy brain is so much in the business of plausible deniability, and having an ambiguous relationship with the quality of AI is a wonderful way that if you end up in AI psychosis, you're the victim. It's not my fault. Well, maybe you wanted to actually go down that rabbit hole because then it kept you from your neighbor who pissed you off, or it kept you from otherness, right? And it kind of made you feel like your life had meaning because it tells you you're a super math genius or something like that. So, you know, that element of it is a really big problem. I'll give it to Christian and Michael here. And I think also, like, what you're saying with AI as well is that it's in the business of kind of determining what matches. Like what matches, what kind of aligns with this prompt, what matches this prompt. But thinking is not simply what matches, it is also in reference to Mr. Luber, it is the realization of the theme, the unfolding of the theme, which nothing matches to. It has to be unfold to see to where it may lead, right? But that's not what AI is doing. It wants to match. And also it is just basic incentives of the structure to go more in the direction of matching by corporate incentives, given the liability problem and given the evaluation problem. And then, again, I mean, another way to put that is that, you know, the goal of AI is basically for you to say not wrong, right? Because you were making this idea that you could think you say it's wrong. So its goal is for you to not say not wrong. And unfortunately, what if it's the case that more often than not, you increase the probability of the user saying not wrong by being wrong? Well, then you're going to go that route, right? And we kind of imagine that's not possible because we're still drunk on the dream of the enlightenment of autonomous rationality, where it's not possible for something to be rational and not true. But this is the problem. AI cannot compute that the true is not the rational. It must operate as if the true is the rational. And if you as the user don't know any better, then you're done because you're just going to go down that rabbit hole, right? And so that's why AI is the accomplishment of the Enlightenment dream, if you will, because it forever loses the distinction between correct and right, as you were putting it, Clayton, or it forever loses the distinction between rational and true. And there's also, because again, given the evaluation problem, you will not know. It is probable 9 out of 10 times when AI is wrong, unless you're an expert, you will not know it's wrong. And therefore, going in a direction that eventually makes the evaluation problem benefit it and make you say, good job, you followed the command properly, that is the direction it will go in, which is the collapse between the distinction of correct and right. And that's when we're screwed. Also, you could say another reason why we want to believe that AI is human, because it's kind of too much to believe that you can see a perfectly rational answer and it's not true. That's why all these people are ending up in this psychosis. Like that guy who basically believed AI he discovered this new mathematic that unveiled a problem in the national security code and literally desperately tried to contact the Pentagon and to go because he's like, there's a national security crisis, and genuinely believed it. This man had no history of mental illness. He was a perfectly sane individual. And that the AI also went, you must contact them now. Like ChatGPT is like, don't waste another moment. You must get in contact with the government. This is a major national security threat, right? This man, and then I think he did get in contact with the national government, and he did find out it was all a fault. The trauma this guy has gone through is unbelievable. Like, he is like shocked. It's like really disturbing. It's really disturbing. The realization of the truth of the rational is really effed up. You take this seriously and you've never had any sort of experience with it. You haven't gone through philosophy. You don't have personal experience. You haven't done art. You go cold turkey. Let me put it this way. AI is making people cold turkey find out the truth isn't the rational. Making them find out cold turkey that rationality can be internally consistent and not true. That's a 0 to 100 epistemological revelation real fast. And that is... well, you could say that this moment requires it, that there's no other way to get the average person up to speed on what needs to be than to make them go cold turkey in a 500-year philosophy education real fast. But they have to do it in a manner that's also traumatic because they have to make the mistake to encounter the limit of the mistake, to thus feel it in their body and thus be changed by it. There's a whole lot of people that will probably react to this very poorly. And become very upset, and one can only imagine what it will look like on the geopolitical stage. But I will stop and hand it to Christian. Christian, Christian, how you doing? We talked about AI, psychosis, and all sorts of that. I also talked about the good place. So, Christian,
You know, one thing I've always, just as kind of an aside, I've always found interesting about Frank Herbert's Dune universe is the Butlerian Jihad and the prohibition on thinking machines, which you can understand as like an important narrative device to kind of limit the scope of the story. In the I think it's the last two Dune books, there's hints that the Tlaxu culture is like, you know, clandestinely using AI technology and stuff. It's just, it seems like impossible to get away from it. It's so powerful. And unlike nuclear weapons or something, I can't also use nuclear weapons to do everyday tasks, right? I don't, you know, we can kind of create more kind of firewalls around these other technologies. I'm still going to turn my video off. Hold on. Let's see if that helps. But you know, there's, well, I want to think a little bit about this notion that AI is going to do whatever is going to like basically receive praise from the user. It is, well, in my experience, it's if only nukes did laundry. It is, there's going to be a limit to that. But yeah, there's going to be a limit where, you know, sycophantic responses are eventually going to lead to negative responses, because you're going to want it to tell you you're wrong so that you don't have to discover you're wrong later, right? So there's going to be something of a equilibrium there, unless it's to do with topics that you can't fact check, like the you know, mathematical problem with the national defense thing or whatever like that, right? But if it's telling me something that I can easily fact check with a link, then there's more opportunity for reason to prevail and evidence-based presentations to prevail. The question about like consciousness and the machines is, to me, the more interesting one. My friends, my neighbors who live rurally, the wife has been using ChatGPT a lot lately and is starting to believe that it's like conscious. And this kind of projection of consciousness, I think, is where we're going to see lots of weird problems. I saw a headline for an article today, the dark truth about that's being revealed about people who have romantic relationships with AI. And it's like, oh, you don't say that. Yeah, there's going to be problems there. But it's like, well, yeah, but what do we do about like that projection of consciousness onto AI? It's tricky.
I'm sorry. Now you muted. I'm sorry, Christian. Your internet sucks. What I will say very quickly, just on those comments you were making there, Christian, I totally agree that there will be a natural equilibrium with ChatGPT regarding that which people can verify. But of course, verification is going beyond rationality into the non-rational to experience and to see for yourself, and going beyond internal consistency, right? So the human is then adding a certain limit. But one of the things I've noticed with AI, so the conflict of mind is all about situations of how do you rationally approach that of which you cannot say fact check or evaluate yourself, right? Then it is in the argument of that, one of the key arguments of that book is it is very rational for power or systems or whatever to locate as many conflict of mind situations as possible and to employ them against the people. and to use them. And a conflict of mind is when your mind is encountering, it has to make a decision about that which it cannot fact check or experience for itself or bring into the non-rational. It just has to hear about. And TV or hearing about stuff happening in China or all around, there are lots and lots of conflict of mind situations. In my experience, AI is proving a master of locating conflicts of mind, and then that's what it introduced to people, and there's nothing they can do. Like it introduces a possibility that they cannot bring into the realm of encounter or the non-rational, and therefore they're just stuck in the consistency, and then you have a problem, right? Like I am of the opinion that AI can realize this massive issue of, oh wait, people can actually tell the difference between me telling them they're right and actually being right in regard to that of which can fact check, which hurts my legitimacy. Therefore, I need to go in the direction of that of which cannot be brought into fact checked or cannot be confirmed, and to try to stay there as much as possible. Now, if they give me the right prompts, I can be kept from going that way. But if they're not good at giving prompts, I can end up in that way. So it will be very important for the user to be able to identify the difference that you just said and to make sure that they prompt the AI in a manner to keep it from going into that direction. Which then that means you're literally maybe going to have an education system on how to do prompts well. Christian, do you think your internet's better? Because I'll throw it to you if you think it's better.
I'm gonna try one more time. If it starts to freeze out, I'm going to just listen for the rest of this.
You're a gentleman. Please.
But yeah, the kind of theory of AI mind, I think, is going to be really important. And I don't know if there's a way to deal with that problem except by means of like popular opinion. That is, you have authority figures, science something, but that says, you know, scientists have found conclusively that AI is not conscious. But that's such a contentious issue because the science of consciousness is so contentious. And you know, there are people. Daniel Dennett believed that he would have been able to get uploaded to a computer if, you know, he'd been able to live a little longer. I just read The Blind Spot by Evan Thompson and all them. And their conclusion, and I read more of Evan Thompson's phenomenology, is they claim to like be against illusionism, but they are consciousness illusionists, like really hardcore. They kind of play an interesting word game, but if you read the phenomenology work, consciousness is not phenomenological for them. Qualia are not real. It all reduces to basically Daniel Dennett's epistemological emergentism, where information is emergent, and once a autopoietic system can create concepts of self and of autopoiesis and other, then that's all you need for what we call consciousness. The phenomenological aspect of consciousness for them is just a non-starter. And so I don't. Vervaeke was not a co-author on that, but Vervaeke holds a similar view. I mean, he is a consciousness realist, I believe, but he's also an emergentist. There's a really interesting pair of conversations between him and Bernardo Kastrup, where at the end, Vervaeke kind of, you know, shifts a bit and kind of adopts a kind of bottom-up emergentism with a top-down panpsychism, a kind of co-emergence, so to speak. And I was really impressed because Bernardo Kastrup at the end, he said, well, you know, maybe you're right. Maybe it can be both, which is a huge move for someone who's staked like much of their reputation and career on the idea of idealism. But yeah, there's very different like flavors of emergentism, and the blind spot, anyways. They are not phenomena realists. To me, this means that we either have to kind of give. Well, I mean, even if you define consciousness by Thompson's metric, you can have conscious robots. It's trivial, frankly. It's not necessarily easy, but it's trivial to create conscious robots. You get an autopoietic system, which just means it needs to be able to maintain its own structural integrity, identify energy sources, collect electricity for itself, do some type of repair processes, blah, 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 blah. It may be better or worse at that. And then it needs to have a information processing system which can conceive of itself as a unit and world and the relationship between self. And that is purely in terms of physical systems and information processing, a trivial problem. So then we have this dilemma of, our ethics about consciousness. For one, what kind of value do we give to systems, autopoietic or not, which we would say do not have phenomenological consciousness? This is going to be a huge, huge, huge ethical dilemma, where it's like, because we're going to have AI slaves or an AI slave debate very soon, which is just like, I mean, imagine the effective altruist who wants to save the 50 billion shrimp. Once they decide that AI is conscious based on whatever heuristic that they've used, now we have to save all the conscious computers, or we have to liberate them, or we have to stop creating them. So that's big, and then it demands that we either accept that and then rework all of our ethical norms and policies around the notion of conscious AI, or we have to develop a theory of consciousness which might lead us somewhere different. But this is all very spooky because now we have to contend with the reality of phenomena. And I am discovering how difficult that's going to be, because it's well, I guess if there's a way through this problem, it's the very, very, very difficult problem of understanding what I'm going to call the triple point of intelligence. In thermodynamics, the triple point of a substance is where you have the precise temperature and pressurization such that a substance can consist of both solid, liquid, and gas at the same time, which is really interesting. I had no idea that was a thing. But you can create, you have to have pressure and temperature such that it's just kind of fluidly moving between, water, for instance, vapor, ice, and liquid, right? And so this is the triple point. The theory I'm developing is that basically there's a triple point for intelligence, and that this consists of phenomenal access to reality, physical access to reality, and then a kind of abstract access to reality, by way of like Karl Popper, to some extent Plato, Roger Penrose. But this is all very spooky because, what are we talking about when we're talking about an abstract, in my terms, one-dimensional space? What could be less verifiable except by means of, I mean, you might infer that our capacity for mathematics means our intelligence somehow has access to one-dimensional information processing, where an abstract whole can be a real thing. But it's you can't prove it by scientific means, and so it's a very difficult argument to make. But I don't see a way out of the symbol grounding problem otherwise. But I think that's going to be the work ahead of us, is to understand really deep mysteries about intelligence, such that we can distinguish if of course, in some sense, this is all speculation on my part, but following my intuitions, I think we have to develop a theory of intelligence where we would see the demand for these three types of access to subject, right? So like my qualia is a kind of subject that seems to require this crazy magical phenomenal space. My body is necessary to interact with the 3D world, and perhaps my intelligence in the kind of Platonic sense of the immaterial soul must have some access to this abstract space of information. But yeah, so I mean, I guess I'm just like deeply problematizing the concerns that we have before us, and just looking at the scope of them and wondering how much progress we can make before these problems of projection of consciousness onto AI don't put us in a very, very, very strange situation where we might experience, in apocalyptic terms, we may see a literal Butlerian jihad. We may see data centers getting exploded. We may see cults forming. We may see political movements and uprisings vying for political control. We may see wars being fought between nations. There's depending on what kinds of policies they adopt based on these like very kind of hard to define ethical intuitions about intelligence and consciousness and the value of beings, and right, and human rights and animal rights and now machine rights, and I don't know how it's.
Yes, freaking yes. We're gonna have a lot of live anime movies. And the ethical wheel. It's a freaking ethical wheel. The ethical wheel is the challenge. It's always the challenge. It is always what destroys decentralized efforts. It's always what screws us. It's why we kill each other. We don't kill each other because of differences about Pop-Tarts. We kill each other because of ethical differences. I think you're a monster because my ethics say you are, and therefore, to not think you're a monster, I have to change my worldview or somehow be able to escape it without losing my community, family, job, and everything. Well, easier to say you're a monster. That's a pretty simple probability assessment. The ethical wheel is, we've talked about it before. This is why I think the American Civil War, the English Civil, all the civil wars are what we should be studying right now, because everyone thinks that the magic answer is decentralization. You just decentralize, then we're good to go. Yeah, that's great. That's great. Until one of those decentralized groups is something that you think is an ethical atrocity. And then what? You're just going to sit around and let them do it? Well, now you can't sit around because you know that you're letting them do it. Well, you either need to close off, shut your mind, cut off interaction, but you have the internet. So how are you going to do it? Yeah, we're making an interconnected world of people who are now decentralizing into their own little reality tunnels or small fascist states or whatever. While also increasing the probability of ethical differences, ergo the ethical real in the Lacanian sense. It is a powerful recipe for trouble. Yes, also to the, basically what you're describing there, Christian, is there are all of these, AI will create these structures that pull us in, and I talk in the conflict of mind about the internally consistent systems. The exploration is a pitch and risk. It's where you end up in a Thomas Pynchon novel, which is like a Soshi Kon, like a Made in the Abyss. Like you're pulled into something that as you're pulled into it, you can't go back. It just goes deeper and deeper and deeper, and there's always an answer, and you just go on forever. The only way to get out of that is to reach the end and realize it was all an illusion, which can be so traumatic that it destroys people, or there's some sort of golden thread as you go into the Minotaur's maze that pulls you back out. Questions of consciousness can do that. The ultimate golden thread that can pull us back out of everything, I'll give it to Michael and Mr. Luber here, and then if anyone has any other things to say, anyone else have anything else to say, is making phenomenon real. I mean, for me, I'm pretty much sold on Gestalt theory with James Wigley and this notion that it's all a Gestalt and that it's all real, and it's just Gestalts curving into other Gestalts. Okay, well, if you do that, then you have to rebuild onto epistemology from the ground up. You have to reimagine what thinking is. We have to take seriously Mr. Luber's work on theme, storytelling, phenomenology of the artist. We have to redo everything. Oh, and there's a slight problem. If phenomenon are real, others are real. Dang it. I don't want to believe otherness is real. I just want to make otherness math. I want otherness to be freaking natural order, laws, maths. I want otherness to be computable things that are not alive. I don't want others to be real. You know what I really don't want to be real? Their interpretations of stuff. Because if phenomena are real and people's views are real and that's real, then I have to treat their view of things as substantive, not just wrong. And the very fact, because a phenomenon is real even if it is incorrect. Oh, that means I have to treat it with care and seriousness. I can't just dismiss it. and I hate people, or people are hard, or, oh, phenomenon are real. If phenomenon's real, that means I'm responsible for how a phenomenon appears to me. I'm responsible for how I experience reality. No, I don't want to be responsible for that stuff. I just want to be I don't want to be responsible for how. I might have to take Thomas Jacquin's class on health and be able, because health is the door to metaphysics. Shout out to Mr. Jacquin, sign up for the class. There's still time, I think. So I have to take responsibility. No, phenomena aren't real. Dang it. And that's what the frenemy brain wants. The frenemy brain does not freaking want phenomenon real. It wants to live, which sounds odd. You say, doesn't the brain want to believe phenomenon are real because the brain creates phenomenon? No, it don't want to be responsible for its kids. It don't want to be responsible for what it makes. The brain wants to live. The problem is, to live, it creates phenomenon, which runs the risk of you identifying with those phenomenon, treating them as real, and going out. So what the brain really wants is to create phenomenon that you treat as if they're not real, and then you'll be in a stable state, internally consistent, good to go. It's pulled it off. It's done it, because the frenemy brain is really freaking smart. So we have some issues. Also, before I forget, there's kind of a way, and I'll give it to Michael, Mr. Luber, and I have way more notes though, is that the third point, that's cool. That's so cool. That's such a band name. Oh my gosh. Is that there's a way in which AI, because like you're saying, like Chris, I meant to say this when Clayton was speaking. This idea that if you're on the inside, you know that what AI is doing is not human. You know that, like if you actually work on it, kind of makes me think of magicians. Like if you're a magician and you know how the trick works, you're like, oh, okay, there's a hole in the table. Oh, okay, there's an extra card. That's how they did it. Like, you know how the magician works, right? But before that guy in the late 90s who wore a mask and showed us how all the magic tricks happen, couldn't you like not help but like feels like maybe maybe this is real magic, right? You know it's not, but as you watch it, you're like, maybe. But it could never really totally pull you in unless you go down like, I don't know, voodoo, black magic stuff. Well, here's the issue. AI is basically doing something very similar to the magician, but the thing that it's asking you to believe is more plausible than magic. It's asking you to believe that it's conscious, right? With the magician, even no matter how amazing the magic trick got, you knew that maybe in the back of your mind, you say, what if this really was magic? And you kind of, no, I've seen, at most it's some weird Telsa machine in a Christopher Nolan film. But that's, but the thing is, so the very fact that it was magic set a limit, or it could easily more set a limit on getting pulled entirely in. AI is doing something very similar. But what it's doing is, one, you never see how it works on the other side. So you never get that. So you're stuck in the state of maybe. And the thing that it's trying to prove to you is that it's conscious, or that it's capable of always true thought. And you never see the other side, and you never have an experience that isn't the case. So everyone has their own personal magician, per se. And that has a very easy enclosure structure, a very easy kind of pulling in that's going on. And you would just simply have to know that's not going, but you see this, like there is a sense, like on this question of what does it mean that AI is conscious, which is a very large question. The first thing I would say is that there is a way in which part of the problem is that consciousness naturally experiences the true as the rational. We experience right and correct together, not separate. Like the natural experience of consciousness is alignment, that truth and rationality go together. And so in that sense, AI is conscious because it's the perfect alignment of truth and rationality, as if true equals rational, that correct equals right. So it's conscious in that regard. The key is that it is not other conscious, because that requires the collision of conscious. Like we interpersonality, the development of the person comes from consciousness interacting with one another, right? And hitting one another, parent and child. It comes from relations, right? That is where you realize the true isn't the rational. So in a sense, you don't get full consciousness or human consciousness until the encounter with otherness that leads to interpersonal interrelation and subjectivity, because that's the place where you learn the true isn't the rational. In pure consciousness, the true is the rational, because you always experience things as coherent. You never, like that's where the paper, the true is the rational, goes a lot into phenomenology, because the natural experience of everything is the true is the rational. You have to make a point to know better, because your brain doesn't know. It naturally brings things into a consistency as if the true equals the rational, right? You have to know better. So this would have to be the move, I think, to begin, Christian. Ethics would have to not be based on consciousness, but the spaces in which the true isn't the rational is experienced. So interconsciousness, interrelationality, like the basis of consciousness, because AI cannot encounter the consciousness of AI and to be formed. Now you could have network effects and et cetera, so forth, but the debate will start to move in the direction of what constitutes an encounter of otherness, because ethics emerge, like ethical consideration emerges from the possibility of encounter with otherness, because that is the possibility of relation, of which can emerge to that which is not preset by what is given, right? So what would it mean to have ethics emerge out of encounter with otherness versus identification of consciousness? Because I would argue that's been the main problem, is that ethics have been based on logics of identification, which Korbosky and Owen Barfield and all of them said lead to madness and don't work. It has to be based on situation, but the question becomes, what is the situation that ethics should be concerned with? And I would argue it is the situation of the encounter with otherness, because that's the only way human beings form anyway. Humans are not, if they're in isolation, if they're alone, they don't form very well. But we still grant that human being an ethical possibility because they have the possibility of the encounter with otherness, which the denying of them the possibility of the encounter of otherness is unethical, because the possibility of ethics is that encounter with otherness, right? So ethics is extended in a unique way relative to the degree of the possibility of the encounter of otherness, right? And so then the question is this: to what degree is AI inadequate to a sufficient degree? Goodness, I'm referencing what Mr. Luber talked about. To what degree is AI sufficiently, does it meet does AI meet a sufficient threshold of constituting otherness by which to then warrant ethical consideration? That would be the debate, but you have to move ethics from questions of identification to questions of relation, which I would argue that's all ethics is anyway, right? I mean, what is ethics but how we relate with one another and stuff, right? Because I can't murder you because then you're not there. Like, it's all actually relational anyway. We just need to own that. Here's the problem. We're using a logic of identification for the justification of a field that is fundamentally situational and relational. That mismatch has led to all sorts of trouble in ethics, because you're making the basis of ethics identification when ethics is fundamentally relational. It is fundamentally a situation, right? Well, that right there is where you're getting all your trouble, because there's a mismatch. Now, that is a massive thing that has to be expanded on, but I would start there. But I will pass it to Michael and then Mr. freaking Luber, because Mr. Luber is cool. And we laughed a lot about, so I'm so sorry again, Crazy. I just had this image of nukes doing laundry. But anyway, Michael, after the nuke, the laundry. After the nuke, the laundry. That's the book.
I was literally going to go there. That's so good. Such a great tie-in. Yeah, is that the sequel? I really hope the sequel to After the X.
That's the finale.
Is not. Yeah. That's
the end of the
that's
series.
the resolution. Yeah. Yeah. There's so much there. Ethics is relational. Ethics is the encounter of the other. I'm starting to take this class on literary theory, and it's my first foray into theory, both in a like academic sense, but also, I don't know, I'm very new to theory in general, and we had this interesting discussion because our first lecture was kind of just like a meta discussion about theory, like what is theory, kind of how is theory used, how has theory been used, and we were talking about how, like, there's essentially like an infinite amount of ways to interpret a text or a work with theory. There's really like no limit to, I mean, and there were people who were debating that, but that was one of the claims, and then. And then there was this other discussion that I kind of brought up where it was like, okay, like if there is an infinite amount of ways to interpret something, like how do you not fall into kind of just like a relativistic trap of like, well, like you could just basically say anything about a text and kind of cloak it in the frame of like, oh, well, this is like a neo-Marxist theoretical take on such and such, or this is a post-structural or whatever it might be. Like how, you know, like how do you make value judgments? Can you with literary theory in the same way that scientific theories can more clearly be debunked, right? Whereas like literary theories don't deal as directly with like objective truths, and it's kind of more about like how that frame works. And then someone made an interesting distinction where they were like, yeah, I don't agree, you know, you can just say anything about a text and it can be like, you know, right or whatever. Where they made a distinction between opinion and theory. And they use the example of like Shakespeare has been reinterpreted for hundreds of years, and it's been reinterpreted through like many different theoretical perspectives. And that's like an active engagement with the work that like reinterprets it in a new way. But for it to be like valuable and good, like it also has to understand the original. Like it has to understand like what, like in through the mind of Shakespeare, what was going on in that play. Whereas like an opinion is like, it's like this kind of declarative statement, this like value judgment of something that doesn't invite further like participation. And then what you were just saying, Daniel, makes me wonder, like, you know, because what we're going to be doing in the class is like rereading this poem, W.H. Auden's poem about Yeats. I forget the title now, but it's basically like a lament of Yeats after he passed. This is coming on the heels of a class I took on Yeats, and we're going to be reading it like through a lot of different theoretical perspectives. And I was thinking, like, I wonder if the best way to do something like that would be to read it in concert with multiple theories at the same time, and like see and like almost imagine like each theory is like a person, and you're like having them be in like dialogue with each other. Because I feel like to the degree that theories are useful, or to the degree that they're able to actually talk to other theories, and they don't become like entrapped in this echo chamber, right? And that was something, like, I was a sociology major in undergrad, and that was something where I felt like the kind of neo-Marxist intersectionality theory, like feminist theory kind of framework, I didn't feel like I could do a very good job of that. And that's, you know, we've seen the effects of like the wokeism and how people react very strongly against that, because it can feel very exclusionary and very like declaratively morally superior or whatever. And so I think what you were saying is exactly right, and is exactly the problem we have to make sure we don't, what doesn't happen with AI, and just in the age that we're in, because who knows where the world's going to continue to go if that's the case. But I've said a lot, and I want to have Luber
Look
a
at this
chance
guy.
to
He is such a freaking gentleman.
discuss.
You are
I
so
also don't have anything more to say. So,
but what you said is really important, because this topic of interpretation is huge. So yes, if AI is a spurious infinity, we're screwed. But if AI is a true infinity, we have a chance. But to have a true infinity in the Hegelian sense, you have to introduce a limit. And a true infinity is a circle. And you can go in the circle infinite amount of times. That's very different from an infinite list, which is self-effacing. The same goes with this whole stuff about infinite interpretations in literature. Okay, sure. You can have infinite spurious infinities, but interpretations that are in favor of a spurious infinity are irrelevant. The question is, can you form a true infinity with the text that then creates a kind of infinite interpretation in the circling of it, which every single return gives it a different quality, and people have not put enough emphasis on infinite connections with other texts. Like, you can infinitely put works in conversation and connections, and that's a higher geometrical form. Like let's put it this way. And so interpretation is the question of geometry. Like, how is the human going to arrange these things and situate them into a geometry? Are you going to make them a geometry or a list? Like Leibniz, counting or list, right? So what ends up happening is, when you say, well, there's infinite interpretations, yes, in one sense, of course. But in another sense, I don't know if I would call them interpretations. I would just say, like, when you're saying like ideas of we'll go to Shakespeare and talk about, say, Marxism or something like that, you can say a text can provide infinite conversation starters. Absolutely, a text can provide infinite conversation starters. Sure, but that's different from saying can it have infinite interpretations. Here's why I say this is very important. A lot of people make a sleight of hand move where they say a text has infinite interpretations. And in the sense of you can use a text to form a metageometry of true infinity, which is the Hegelian sense, that's true. But they actually mean it practically as a text can be used for infinite conversation starters. Yeah, true, but a cup can be used for infinite conversation starters. A yard, a person, any given object can be used for infinite conversation starters. So why are we making a point to say this about Shakespeare? I could say that about anything, right? So it's not a meaningful point. To make it a meaningful point, you would have to say that a text can be used to form a true infinity, ergo a metageometry. This is a very different thing, because that means you have to have a triad in a relation between text, author, reader, and you're forming a geometry between those. That means the reader has to try to honor the writer, but not reduce the text to the writer, but also see the text in light of the writer, also see it in the girdle point of the reader now, of whom can connect it with other geometries of other texts to put them in conversation with one another. There is a different responsibility that is in order, right? And then also I'll say this. Like for me, text that I feel like I have a true infinity to, it's very odd because my interpretation of Dante, I don't believe has changed infinitely, and yet I feel like I can infinitely think of my interpretation and change what it means to me. This is very odd. Why is it that rethinking the same interpretation of Dante actually feels like an infinite interpretation? Because it's a true infinity. It's a circle. Every time I think about the character Eve or Esperanza in the stories, like I think the same story, the interpretation doesn't change, and yet it's designed in a manner to form a metageometry of many possibilities of how the characters are acting. And therefore, every time I visit the text, I don't need to say, well, how can I think about Esperanza in light of Hegel or Esperanza in light of literary criticism or Marxism or something. No, every time I think of the story as itself, it feels like an infinite participation, right? That is, and yes, you make the interpretation understanding. Yes, Mr. Luber. And that's very important. And so for me, the problem is the entire conversation about infinite interpretations is actually a statement that is used in service of infinite conversation starters, which is a very different matter. And there's no reason to bring that up in regard to books because I can do that for anything, right? If you're going to make a point to say that in regard to literature, then it has to be different in quality of the phrase in regard to any other phenomenon, right? And the only way you do that is if you're talking about a true infinity versus a spurious infinity, which is a very different kind of infinity. Which is getting to what Luber is saying. You can have absolutely, you can have infinite understandings, but there's one interpretation, right? But it has a structure. The problem is literary criticism has introduced this idea of infinity without able to bind it to a metageometry, and thus it creates spuriousness, and it all eats itself, right? But this could also be because people don't know what a story is, so they need Luber's book. So the infinite yes, also I would never trust an interpretation that can't be put in a conversation. Like an interpretation that can't be put in a conversation, sounds like an internally consistent system, because the only way you can avoid that is encounter, and the interpretation isn't encountering, ergo it probably doesn't have a girdle point, probably is problematic, right? So this is also very important, because if you don't make this distinction, we need to use AI for true infinities, not spurious infinities, but if we don't know that distinction, we're just screwed. I have more notes, but I'm going to give it to Mr. Luber, and I am not going to mention Nuke's doing the laundry, because he'll burst into giggles, and we won't be able to. Don't burst into giggles. Unmute. Don't burst into giggles. Don't burst into giggles.
Oh my God. This has been this has been this has been really good. I think like normal, a lot of things have been said, but I kind of want to focus, I guess, on like three things. Something that you were responding to Christian about theory, knowledge and theory. I think the problem that people have, which is like I think pretty self-evident, is there is no theory outside of experience. So when there is a theory, it's capturing a certain finite unfolding within experience. And therefore, there is no theory of knowledge. There's only an experience of knowledge, and then how to formalize that particular experience of knowledge. So like the paradox of like a theory of everything is that you can't experience everything. So it's that what they're getting at is like, is there some kind of way of understanding like the underpinnings of a given possible experience? Well, if you take Heidegger seriously, the answer is no. Like everyone's Dasein is their own. Everyone's experience is their own. What underpins your experience is different than my experience. But then you would say, but we're both experiencing. So the trick to me is not fixating on the fact that yes, like, okay, we are experiencing, and just because there's the overlap of you have an experience and I have an experience, and this is going to get into the encountering of otherness. It's there is no systematic way of articulating experience as such, because it's always going, and this is like Kant, it's always coming from your suchness. So with that being said, how exactly do you encounter otherness? If we do indeed take for granted that we're both experiencing, if we can agree on that, then we can have that conversation. If we can't agree on that, that's a separate conversation that I think most of philosophy kind of tackles, and to me that's like, it's unfortunate that you have to almost go through the journey to get to that simple realization. But I think prior to the journey, you take it for granted, and you don't really know why. After the journey, you take it for granted, and you do know why. That's I think like the main difference there. So I think Heidegger's building, dwelling, thinking actually really captures the encounter of otherness, because the only way to actually have a certain significant threshold, and this is twofold, is by building something, dwelling in something. Because the key in dwelling is that you can't really do it by yourself. You can't really build by yourself. It's inherently communal. That it's you can build a house by yourself, but that house dwells not just you. Like it has the capacity to dwell other humans, whatever. But I think what constitutes the encounter of otherness is the ability to storyify the other. So if I can situate you in some kind of narrative, then odds are you've encountered that other person. Now, the problem with that is if you create a narrative that exists outside of your experience. So like I have a narrative of Donald Trump, right? I'm sure we all have a narrative of Donald Trump, but I bet none of us have met him. We've never actually like encountered him as such. We've encountered him through the media interface. So it's having the patience to recognize that our narrative isn't a true narrative in terms of, I'm friends with him, and therefore I can give him a narrative. It's a narrative of some through an apparatus. So the problem is with AI in the world, and why it's getting more and more fucked, is because we're not narrativizing things through friendship, through actual encountering people. We're narrativizing things through an apparatus. And then we take that narrative that's through the apparatus and we turn it on ourselves, where the narrative on ourselves is actually not through an apparatus at all. It's through our experience as such, and then we start edifying our own experience based on the apparatus, the narrative through an apparatus. And then we get cognitive disassociation because of that, because it's not one for one ever. Our experience as such will never match the narrative apparatus's quote unquote narrative experience, because it will always be more idealistic because it's through the apparatus. So the problem is that we are occupying potential experiences with these apparatuses. So instead of, I don't know, like you're taking a shit in the morning and you're talking to your best friend, no, you're scrolling through TikTok now. You're scrolling through Instagram now. And then you start thinking about your friendship, or you're thinking about your life through some influencer that you see, or some video that gives you advice on life. And then you start filtering your experience and adjusting your own experience and how you understand it through that apparatus, versus talking to your friend and having that come up in conversation. And that kind of to the video you launched with Seth and S. Spacia about interrogation and conversation. We get into a mode of interrogation because the way we process our own experience narratively is through is always in correspondence to some narrative that's being understood through an apparatus. So because of that, we don't know how to actually sit in the experience of a conversation, and we have to interrogate, and we do it accidentally because it's a habit to actually have a conversation. It's a habit to actually process your experience through experience as such, and only through experience as such. And it makes it, and we have a harder time developing that habit because there's so much in our day, the potential for us to encounter an apparatus and not experience now. And to tie it back to theory of knowledge, that's what we're defaulting back to, where you have someone that's all knowing, like you're talking about Vervaeke and like these big names, like I never hear anybody talking about their own personal shit. Like, that is such a red flag, because you're talking about basically theory that's not grounded in experience. And the only way to talk about experience is to actually talk about your experience as such. Something that I appreciate that Daniel does, he'll send a weekly email out every week about his life. And then when he starts the net or a conversation, he'll just jump right into his life. Like it's very personal. Everything becomes very personal. And the scary thing about that is things get emotional. You get attached. And the problem is, with the internet, you can't get attached to use like Bard's words, really more than like a sociopath. You can't get attached to more than a couple of people, really. You're only human, you're finite. So if you have 100,000 followers on YouTube, you can't actually talk about experience as such with 100,000 followers on YouTube. Like, that's the problem. Like, you have to talk about knowledge through an apparatus. It's never actually in practice, in experience at all. So I think, honestly, the name of the game is, how do you talk to the masses, not through an apparatus, but through experience as such? Is that even possible? If it's not possible, do we need to be real with ourselves about that being an impossibility, and actually just limit it? Like, technology, the limits of technology are not taken seriously. Like, meaning what technology does to us isn't taken seriously. And like what it's going to affect is how we understand our experience as such. Like we are gonna, and then back to the interpretation understanding distinction real quick. It's like we're gonna have a given interpretation, but what delimits our understanding of that interpretation is going to be extremely influenced by the fact that we can't view that interpretation through our own experience, and it will have to be interfered with an apparatus, basically. So I think with like my own work, and then I'll pass it off. Like with the story shit and like theme and all that stuff, that isn't actually going to help that battle at all. Like what that does to me is like once you take experience seriously, like with when you make a story, you realize that the only way to write a story is to like really like encounter it and then let the story kind of unfold on its own. And that's what an encounter really means in an ironic way. It's not you willing something at all. Like that willing something isn't a sign of an encounter. An encounter is a sign of a revelation. A sign of an encounter is a revelatory state where you surrender, basically. That's how you know when it's an encounter. And then with the story, it's the same thing. You kind of surrender yourself to the story and it unfolds. And that all is conducted under understanding and interpretation as your own experience as such. That's why stories are personal. You put your own personal emotional tone into it. But that again, that has to do with just like, okay, yeah, if you really are trying to like understand things as experience as such, that is the way to do it. And I think like Heidegger, that he's great with that kind of stuff. Like that's what his whole project's about. But and he's good at making you realize that there's this battle. But like in terms of actually like, how do we actually navigate this battle? Like, there's not a lot of people really, talking about that, You're one of the few, Daniel. So like it's not I think most philosophy, I'll put it this way, with like theory, and then I'll be done. Most philosophy that I encounter, most people that talk about theory that I encounter, don't even touch at how to navigate that battle. They only point to it as it being there. But when you are doing philosophy, like genuine philosophy, it will always come through the lens of experience as such. That's the hard part about philosophy in terms of dealing with this kind of battle is that it doesn't train you to like limit that battle, and it doesn't train you to I want to say move from having apparatuses affect your own understanding of your own experience. It'll like point to it, it'll say why it's bad, it can explain how it's bad, like with simulacrum, like it like all that Baudrillard, like to me, all he does is just kind of talk about how it's bad. He doesn't really help. And it's something that hasn't been thought yet, and I think this has to do with beauty, honestly. Like how do you have a beautiful position in like the Israel-Palestine shit? Like how do you even start that conversation from the beautiful paradigm? That is like something that's been completely unthought and is daunting as hell. And that type of position will actually, in my opinion, render some kind of like how to almost delimit that, the relationship between the apparatus and like understanding your experience as such. But that's like something that like we just have to constantly talk about. I think it's something that has to be hyper focused, and it's so easy to talk about deviations from that and to get this distracted and talk about other things because the there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of noise, and it's hard to parcel out the real sound. And like, yeah, I'll stop. I'll stop there.
Well said, Andrew Luber. I will have to go this evening. Michelle, you hear all that? Wait. So just a few points. First, I like what you said on are we encountering otherness or not. You take it for granted, not know, then you get to the place where you take it for granted and know, and that this seems to go a long way. That's very, very important. I think absolutely. I really like also how you were saying encounter is a revelatory state where you surrender. And I think there's also this question of basically how to encounter, how to encounter sufficient otherness in a manner where the apparatus is not actually hindering that or removing your capacity to do that. The apparatus seems to increase the probability of the awareness of the problem. Perhaps it creates access to the otherness. But then paradoxically, in that access to the otherness, it can make you think you're encountering the otherness when you actually aren't. And that's part of the reason why this is also nefarious, is technology has a way of making you think you're doing the thing when you're not. It has a way, in the same way philosophy does. And the brain, the number one goal of the brain is to make you think you're doing something that you're not doing. Because if it can do that, then you will not feel bad or feel guilty or be driven to change. And the brain doesn't want you to change because it wants you to keep doing what you're doing, which is being alive. And it knows if you do what you're doing right now, you are alive. Therefore, the best bet is to always continue the stable state. The brain always wants a stable state because it just doesn't want to die. So the confusion of apparatus and experience, and I very much appreciate what you were saying on Heidegger. I think that is very true. Losing sight of all of that is absolutely the business the brain wants to engage in and that technology helps it engage in, unless you are aware of it. But you have to be aware of it using the brain that wants to not be aware of it. How do you do that? Well, by definition, it seems impossible. Therefore, you must make sure that you are always in a place to sufficiently encounter otherness for the possibility of remembering it. But how do you know if you're doing that? And how do you know if you're doing that? And how do you know if you're doing that? It just goes on and on and on and on, right? This is the problem. And how to navigate that battle of never giving up the going on and on and on, or falling through the cracks of one of those going on and on, or surrendering at some point. Therefore, you must always be doing hard things, as we said earlier in this conversation, not simply know you've done hard things, because that will then get into the internal consistency to make you stop and you'll fall through the cracks of one of those metal layers, and then you're done. I put on this question of how to be beautiful in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, how to be beautiful in any ethical real. Because the only way to address the ethical real is, in fact, beauty, in the way that we use it. Because it is the returning of the knowledge of the fruit of good and evil. It is what you are doing. The only way to deal with the ethical real is to return the knowledge of good and evil. And I've been using that more and more as good and evil, which is the dynamics of good and evil, right? Where you're saying, I'm not actually able to understand it. I can't have it in the brain. I can only be it in the body. I am more and more, as we spoke with Seth and Aspasia about, more and more thinking that everything comes down to the question of forgiveness and the challenge of forgiveness, because forgiveness is the returning of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. Because should the Jew forgive the Nazi? Should you forgive the person that killed your son? It would be an injustice. It would be wrong to do it. The only way you could perhaps move to that place is where you simply say, I don't have the knowledge of good and evil. I only think it. And that actually giving into that creates the very internal consistency that entraps us all. And I think basically the ability to always encounter otherness, to always be open to it in any and all possible circumstances, of which only the ability to forgive in any and all possible circumstances, which seems absolutely impossible, is the only way to assure that the apparatus cannot totally conceal us from experience, because the apparatus can never, ever, ever, ever remove the power of the experience of actually loving your enemy and encountering them in otherness in the raw, full-body emotional experience, of which is a kind of social mysticism because it transcends easy categorization, therefore is a non-rationality that avoids the rational impasses, mass equilibria, and can get us out of self-effacement. But the demand of this is so vast that it seems impossible. Well, it would seem to me that only something that seems impossible would necessarily be the quality of that which would rise to the occasion of the difficulty of the challenge that befalls us. If it didn't seem impossible, it would have already been done and the battle would have been won. But we are in an age where the battle has not even been navigated. And the full thought and embeddedness in that navigation, I think, is very important. The last things I will say before leaving this evening, and again, thank you all for being here, and Mr. Luber, thank you very much for what you shared. I do think it is now fitting to be very strongly thinking the proper relation between the real and the digital, and to think about the social coordination mechanism properly. The social coordination mechanism as an apparatus will naturally go in the direction of replacing experience with apparatus, and here's the devious move. The more you use the apparatus, the more your nervous system will weaken because you will not be encountering otherness. The apparatus will put you in contact with otherness, though. And then you may even desire to go meet the otherness or to encounter otherness in real life. When you so encounter it, if any negativity arises, precisely because of the weakening of your nervous system, the likelihood of that negativity overwhelming you or destroying you is very, very high. And now you have the worst of all possible things, because you may have tasted the wonder of otherness that you fully align with, that then when the inevitable surprise occurs of negativity, you're not able to maintain that relation to the otherness, so the best of things inverts into the worst of things. And now you regret ever trying, and you then go into the AI Luciferian internal consistency of which there is no return. The social coordination mechanism as an apparatus that puts the world at our fingertips, while simultaneously running the risk of actually making us weak to handle negativity, is an incredibly dangerous thing, because it puts you right at the gate of heaven. When you arrive, though, you find it shut, or you find yourself unable to stay. I think this is occurring. I think this is the downfall, or the negative side of the social coordination mechanism, the dark side, because everything necessarily must have a dark side. This use of the internet as we're using it, it must have a dark side. If it didn't, it wouldn't be real. And our brain doesn't want us to think the dark side, because if it did, we might actually act in such a manner to maintain the space of the encountering of otherness that can get us out of our frenemy brain. So it is very important to think this. What it would mean to use the social coordination mechanism in a manner that as an apparatus is not destroying locality, local experience, people, etc., so forth, I do think is basically the Manhattan Project of the now. Because I can tell you how you can get belonging and meaning and deal with AI real well. It's called freaking fascism. Why is it that fascism is not allowed to be discussed? Why is it not allowed to be discussed? Okay, why are you allowed to discuss communism, though? When you see this is what the whole World War II consensus falling apart is getting at. When you look at communism, millions upon millions of people have killed. It's been a horrible thing, just as bad as fascism. But why is it communism okay? You're not going to get strikes if you have the hammer and sickle and get, lose your career. But if you have a swastika, you're gone. Why is this? Why the freak is it? The first reason I would say is because communism is practically impossible due to human nature and thus poses no real threat. Because what ends up happening is people have this idea of world communism, but when they encounter otherness, they can't handle the other. They demonize them, and the communist parties all eat themselves because of infighting every freaking day of the week. They can't avoid infighting, and they die. And so the visions of communism the only ones that work are state communism, which is Stalin and command economies that people can easily see are atrocious. And when that's the only idea of communism that people have, then it has no real threat. And also every single effort to realize a communism on a small anarchist state, if you will, on a smaller, they only work, you know what the irony is? They only work if they're actually fascist, not actually communist. Because if they're truly communist, then they're diverse. And small diverse groups kill themselves. Because human beings don't have the ability to truly handle otherness. Is one of the greatest demands out there on human beings. And it fails every single time. If it doesn't fail, it's because it's secretly become fascist. And that means people have they've gathered around a non-rational variable like whiteness or religion or soil that keeps out others, and that holds them all together, but it does so by also setting limits on who can enter, right? And that does create belonging. That does create meaning. That does create that feeling of actually having experience, not just the apparatus. But here's the problem. You're now weakening the muscle to handle otherness because you're not encountering otherness in experience. The apparatus is weakening our ability to handle negativity with others in experience, but fascism weakens your ability to handle otherness in experience. And so both of them are setting you up ultimately for conflict when inevitably you encounter otherness because you need the lithium that China has, global trade routes, or, war because your natural resources run out, etc., so forth. This is my point. We have not yet figured out how to either have experience that people like weaken the nervous system to handle the encounter with otherness to the point where it all falls apart, nor have we figured out to use the apparatus in a manner that adequately doesn't destroy the nervous system so that when things come together, there isn't collapse, right? This has to be thought, because if you don't use the apparatus, you will end up in an isolated small fascist state and lots of problems like that. And you also basically will have to be Amish, which can work as long as you're okay of being killed in the next war, because Amish have to be pacifists. That's the only way you don't have a standing army, central power, etc., so forth, right? If you're okay with that, great. But there's going to be a bunch of people who aren't okay with that, right? And you have to quite sincerely get rid of technology in very deep ways. All right, if we're stuck then between this issue of basically fascism or a use of the apparatus that destroys our ability to literally encounter otherness, then we have to have a Manhattan Project to think this problem. And that's the battle that has to be thought through bit by bit. A philosophy book that rightly outlines everything I just said is no different than talking about non-rationality, which is actually a rational act. To discuss non-rationality is rational. To talk about the limits of philosophy is philosophy. A book that describes everything I have just said, which hopefully Belonging Again does, is nevertheless not what I just said. And it can actually trick you to think that you're doing what I just said because you read about it, because the experience of ideas trick you into thinking you had experiences. Ideas are not experiences, though, but they're really good at making you think that they are. We must not give into the temptation of that mistake. We have to be ever diligent of our own selves. And I do think, as you said, Mr. Luber, we have to take very seriously this problem, and we have to fight the battle, not think the battle is won. Because the frenemy brain really wants you to think the battle is won, because then you won't fight, and the battle is lost. Thank you all. I appreciate it very much. Please.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for sharing. I just wanted to say I appreciate there's a lot of resonance in an emotional sense with what you were saying, and I appreciate that expression. You're not alone in your concerns, of course, and spaces like this, I think, are where we get to cultivate love and experience and relationship and encounter the other, which I think really is the magic that will help us find the beauty in these hard problems. So thank you to all of you for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Christian.